Chapter 491. They didn't talk much. Jean Wan didn't even ask about Shi Niange. After all, she didn't even have a good relationship with him. How could she be qualified to care about someone else's relationship? However, she could tell from Xiao Lui that Xiao Lui's attempt to snatch Shi Niange had failed. Xia Tian gave birth to a son. Jean Wan did not sleep for the entire night and busied herself. She only sat in the maternity ward when the sun rose. She teased the little fellow who had already opened his eyes while listening to Xia Tian flirting with her little brother SWAT officer. "You only came back after I was pregnant for so long. I thought you were going to abandon us. You still know to come back. Why don't you just shed blood for your motherland and stay at the border for the rest of your life? Why did you come back? I submitted an application to the higher-ups. I won't be leaving for a few months. Who cares if you leave or not?" Xia Tian rolled her eyes and then turned to look at the little baby on the small bed not far away. She said with disdain, "Who does this child look like? Why is he so wrinkled and ugly?" The nurse who had just walked in chuckled. "Newborn babies are all like this. You'll know who he looks like in a few days. This child's father is tall and handsome, and his mother is beautiful. He's definitely a good-looking baby." Hearing this, Xia Tian happily pulled back her attention to glare at her little brother. Jean Wan saw that the little baby only opened his eyes for a while before falling asleep again, so she didn't continue to be a third wheel. She got up and was about to go out. "Hey, where are you going?" Xia Tian asked. Jean Wan glanced at her. "Absence makes the heart grow fonder. You've just gotten your marriage certificate and have been separated for several months. If I don't go, am I supposed to sit here and eat your dog food?" Xia Tian immediately winked at her. "Didn't you and Mo Jingshan feed me enough dog food? This is called an eye for an eye. You have to eat it even if you don't want to." Jean Wan, she directly pulled the door open and left without looking back. When she came back with some tonics in the afternoon, Xia Tian remembered to introduce her. "Well, Jean Wan is my best friend. When you interrogated me at the police station, it was she who stood up for me. I've mentioned her to you many times. There's no need to introduce her." As she spoke, she pointed at the handsome policeman beside her. "This is my child's father, Ling Jichen." Jean Wan and the policeman politely nodded at each other. If it weren't for the fact that she really wanted to see Xia Tian's baby, she wouldn't have continued to sit here and eat dog food. She had thought that the two of them would have finished talking in the morning, but in the afternoon, she heard Xia Tian lying on the bed moaning and complaining, "Let me tell you, I'm the only one who can't get the credit for running to the border. If I cry and make you come back every day, you won't get the credit. Then you'll be kicked out of the army and have to go home to inherit the family business, counting bills every day until you die of exhaustion." The policeman nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, without a daughter-in-law as generous as you, I would have to obediently go home to inherit the family business. Just thinking about it makes me feel miserable." "All right, I'll give you the credit." Xia Tian snorted again. Jean Wan's scalp turned numb from the dog food. "Hey, by the way, Nuan, I heard from Xiao Ba that you moved. What happened? Did someone really follow you where you lived previously?" Xia Tian suddenly looked at Jean Wan. "No, it's just that I met a drunkard on my way back. Considering that the environment where I lived previously wasn't very safe, I moved away." Jean Wan gently touched the little baby's hand as she answered. "Aya, that won't do. It's not safe for you to live alone. Feng Ling doesn't have time to accompany you right now, does she? How about this, I'll ask my child's father to find you an intern from the special police force or something. Find someone skilled to be your bodyguard." As she spoke, Xia Tian raised her head to look at the man by the bed who was dressed in a sharp police uniform but had a gentle gaze. "Do you have any suitable candidates? Find someone smart, and good at martial arts." "Ah, that's right, it's best if he's single. Someone handsome." Jean Wan, this week, Jinwan found that someone seemed to have moved into Yuehu Bay again. There were several cars transporting new furniture in the residential area that was usually off-limits to cars. At the same time, she found that the furniture seemed to have been moved into A1 building. Many of the neighbors whispered that they had inquired about it and found that the furniture was to be sent to the top floor of the 16th floor. The top floor? Was it the one above her, that apartment of more than 400 square meters? It was strange. A few days ago, Mr. Vince had told her to pay attention to her safety when she returned home. After all, the 5 floors closest to her were empty, and she was the only one living there. He also said that he had tried to contact the mysterious owner of these 5 floors in the name of his company, wanting to purchase the best units in these few floors of Yuehu Bay, but was rejected. After that, he had not been able to contact the mysterious owner. He also said that he did not know the identity of the mysterious owner, and that she had to be careful at all times. He also said that she had to set up more protective measures for the locks and door passwords of her home. Didn't he say that even the property management couldn't contact the owner, so the apartment couldn't be sold for the time being? But why did the furniture on the upper floor suddenly move in? These 5 floors seemed to have been luxuriously renovated when they were built, and all the materials used were top-notch. Apart from the furniture, electrical appliances, and daily necessities, everything else was well renovated and didn't need to be refurbished. That was why she could move in so quickly. So the 16th floor, the apartment was sold? Someone was going to move in? Miss, please make way. 2 workers who were moving a wine cabinet passed by. As Jinwan was standing in the middle of the apartment's main entrance, they had to ask her to make way. Jinwan hurriedly turned to the side to make way for the 2 workers. She then turned to look at the wine cabinet the 2 workers were moving. Earlier, she saw the workers moving the various tables and chairs in the study. Now, they were moving the wine cabinet. The colors were all black, white, gray, or dark blue. These colors, so the new tenant on the 16th floor was a man? Jinwan got off work early today and wasn't in a hurry to go upstairs. She simply sat on the bench by the lawn and watched the workers move things. Bed, sofa, coffee table, cupboard, moving around. She didn't see anything like a crib or a child's bed. She also didn't see anything like a dresser that women could use. From this, she concluded that the new tenant on the 16th floor was a single man. When the workers came down, a neighbor asked curiously, "Has the apartment on the top floor been sold as well? Who's going to move in?" Chapter 492. In the past 2 weeks after Jinwan moved into Yuehu Bay, she was either at the company, at home, or at Xia Tian's place to see the baby every day. She had little contact with other people. The security facilities here were too perfect. Mr. Vince wanted to wait for her downstairs like before, or pick her up on the excuse that she was far from the company, but these reasons seemed unrealistic. As a result, he had been struggling to find an opportunity to see Jinwan recently. It was rare for him to learn from her secretary that Jinwan would get off work at 4:00 today, and knowing that she had nothing to do tonight, Mr. Vince had been waiting for her since 3:00 in the afternoon. When Jinwan came out of the company just after 4:00, she saw Mr. Vince's car parked downstairs of the MN Group's office building. The man got out of the car and had been waiting for her for a long time. "Where are you going? Shall I give you a ride?" He opened the car door and motioned for her to get in. "No, I drove to the company today. I plan to visit Xia Tian first. She has been discharged from the hospital after giving birth. I'm going to buy some milk powder and clothes for her. In the past 3 years, you have not been in High City, and I have been in touch with CEO Xia often. I haven't visited her since the baby was born. Why don't I go with you today?" Jinwan was about to decline him, but hearing this, she couldn't refuse his kindness on Xia Tian's behalf. She paused and said, "All right, I'll give you her address. You go there first. I'll buy some things and drive there myself. Let's go together." "I can't go empty-handed." "All right, let's go together." Jean Wan got in the car and pointed to a shopping mall nearest to where Xia Tian lived. It was said that there were many baby shops there. Mr. Vince accompanied her to a baby store to buy several cans of imported milk powder, baby clothes, and various toys. He also bought some nutrition products for Xia Tian. She thought there wouldn't be a lot, but there were still a lot of big and small bags. She didn't want Mr. Vince to help her, but she had no choice but to let him carry 2 big bags back to the car. When the 2 of them walked out of the nursery shop, it was already late at night. It was really inconvenient to drive the car that was parked across the road here, so the 2 of them carried a pile of baby products across the road. Jean Wan was all smiles as she looked at the baby clothes in the bags. It turned out that a child's clothes could be so small. Let alone visiting a child, just a small piece of clothing was enough to melt a person's heart. In the traffic, a black Bugatti was hidden among the many cars, and the headlights were dazzling. The man in the car watched Jean Wan cross the road with a pile of baby clothes in her arms and watched her softly follow Mr. Vince to the parking lot across the road with a smile in her eyes. Shen Mu, who was driving, also caught a glimpse of Jean Wan. He immediately had a bad feeling and looked at the rearview mirror, only to see that his CEO Mo's eyes, which were usually indifferent, were deep and dangerous. It was not difficult to guess why CEO Mo's expression was so cold at this moment. It was rare for him to have a dinner party in the West City district, but he saw such a scene on the road. Even Shenmu couldn't help but sigh, not to mention CEO Mo Miss G and Mr. Vince came out together with so many baby clothes, talking and laughing, looking a little warm and sweet, like a loving couple who had been married for a long time. After all, they had been divorced for more than 3 years. If Jean Wan and Mr. Vince really had feelings for each other, it was not completely unreasonable. After all, Mr. Vince had never hidden his pursuit of Jean Wan, and because of BGY Group, Mr. Vince's status in High City was not weak. Among Jean Wan's many pursuers, his appearance and identity were barely acceptable, his aura would not be easily suppressed by Jean Wan's limelight and momentum, and his patience was definitely the best. Most of the other pursuers were given the cold shoulder by Jean Wan and gave up. Only this one person persisted, just like before. Mr. Vince sent Jean Wan downstairs to Xia Tian's home, but remembering that Xia Tian was still in confinement, and according to the old people, men were not allowed to visit her at will, Mr. Vince only sent her here, helped her carry all the things into the elevator, and didn't go in again. Jean Wan went to visit Xia Tian, but because the child was sleeping, she didn't want to disturb the child, so she left in less than half an hour. When she came out, she saw Mr. Vince was still waiting for her in the car, so she naturally took his car back to Yuehu Bay. When she arrived at Yuehu Bay, Jean Wan suddenly received a phone call. She picked up the phone, nodded politely to Mr. Vince, and hurriedly got out of the car. Without saying a word, she walked into the community of Yuehu Bay while talking on the phone. Mr. Vince looked outside for a while, then glanced at the other houses in Yuehu Bay that were further away from the lake view. He was considering whether he should settle for the next best thing and buy another house here, at least to shorten the distance. Jean Wan had already walked far away. He opened the door and got out of the car. Before he called the person in charge of the real estate here, he suddenly saw a luxurious but low-key black Bugatti parked beside him, just separating him from the main gate of Yuehu Bay. The door of the driver's seat opened, and Shenmu got out of the car. As soon as his eyes met Mr. Vince's expression changed slightly. There was no need for him to say anything more. Based on the fact that BGY, a real estate company, and his private investigation skills were unable to identify the owner of the property, he was certain that the other party must have an extraordinary background. He had even suspected that this had something to do with Mo Jingshan. But now, seeing this black Bugatti and Shenmu getting out of the car, he instantly understood everything. Mr. Vince, what a coincidence to meet you here. Shenmu smiled. What's wrong? Did you chase Miss G all the way here? Mr. Vince's thoughts paused for a moment. He looked past Shenmu, who was smiling like a fox, to the car behind him. He glanced at the back window of the car and said calmly and indifferently, "It is indeed a coincidence. It seems that my guess is right. I'm afraid the owner I've been unable to contact is CEO Mo himself? Shenmue smiled. We've all been in the business world for a long time. There's no need to explain everything. Mr. Vince has always been shrewd and difficult to grasp. When it comes to relationships, I advise you not to touch anyone you shouldn't touch. Chapter 493. When Jean Wan first went to England, although she said that she had let go of him and that everything was over, she would often stare blankly alone. It wasn't easy for her to finally get over that stage and completely dig the 3 words Mo Jingshan out of her life. She lived a different life. He was happy that she returned to High City, but on the other hand, he was worried. He wasn't sure what Mo Jingshan planned to do with her. And now, it seemed that Mo Jingshan never intended to let go of her. Although Yuehu Bay is a good place, the west side of the city is still remote. I never expected that CEO Mo would deign to come here. Mr. Vince's eyes were still fixed on the car window as he spoke. Shenmue put one hand in his trouser pocket and chuckled. Mr. Vince, I never expected that you would even dare to chase CEO Mo's ex-wife. You've been chasing her for 3 years, but you still haven't succeeded. What's the point of waiting silently like this? Miss G moved here not only for her own safety, but also to guard against you, right? Shenmue could stay by Mo Jingshan's side for so long not only because he was good at dealing with people, but also because he knew what he should say and what he shouldn't say. He was especially good at grasping people's hearts, just like this shrewd Mr. Vince. He knew him very well. Mr. Vince sneered. I don't know who she's guarding against, but I believe your CEO Mo must know better than me. Whose place does the 5 floors of Yuehu Bay belong to? Tell me, should I remind her or not? At this time, the black rear window of the low-key car slowly rolled down. The man in the car looked at the people outside with deep, unruffled eyes, and his voice was cold and slow. I've always heard that the general manager of BGY Group is a rare person who stepped into the upper class with his own shrewdness and identity without a background. As long as you're sure you can bear the price, I don't mind you giving it a try. Mr. Vince sneered. CEO Mo, you've been in the business world for so long. You're an outstanding member of the upper class, and it's rare for you to be sober and have a good grasp of everything. We've already divorced. There's really no need to disturb Jean Wan's life. Mo Jingshan had already retracted his gaze, not giving him a single glance. His gaze seemed to be stained with the coldness of the night. This is my problem. Based on your current status as BGY's general manager, you wish to pursue the leader of MN Group. Mr. Vince, are you overestimating your own charisma, or are you presumptuously assuming that Jean Wan's gratitude and kindness toward you is because she treats you differently? There was a hint of displeasure and embarrassment hidden on Mr. Vince's face, but it happened to hit the nail on the head. Jean Wan's patience and compromise with him was indeed because he had helped her during her most difficult years in England. But because he didn't want to hear the word gratitude, she didn't say it out loud. But now, Mo Jingshan had directly pointed it out. Mo Jingshan's cold face did not reveal any emotion. From his indifferent expression, Mr. Vince could tell that Mo Jingshan had long found him an eyesore. As long as he wanted to make a move, it would be impossible for him to continue standing in Sea City. Perhaps it was because he had helped Jean Wan before that Mo Jingshan had never touched him. The car window closed once more, blocking off the 2 men's gazes. Shenmue was still smiling at him. At this moment, he had already stood by the side smoking a cigarette. Before entering the car, he handed another cigarette to Mr. Vince, smiling as he asked if he smoked. Mr. Vince did not take it, so Shenmue casually tossed the cigarette onto the ground. He smiled mildly and said, Mr. Vince, you're on your best behavior. Things that don't belong to you, don't even mention 3 years. Even after 30 years, I'm afraid it still won't be yours. Why do you have to ruin your future for someone who has never belonged to you? After speaking, Shenmue entered the car. The noble and cold man in the car did not lower the car window again. The luxurious yet low-profile black Bugatti drove past them. Mr. Vince's cold aura slowly retracted. In the end, his hands that hung by his sides slowly clenched into fists. He was clearly a successful person in his career. He was proud and conceited. But at this moment, he felt somewhat defeated. Jean Wan's heart was really hard to conquer. 3 years had not even melted the tip of the iceberg. His mouth was his. Now, as long as he picked up his cell phone and called her, based on Jean Wan's attitude toward Immerse, she would definitely leave Yuehu Bay immediately and never take another step forward. But could he say this? It was all up to him. Recently, Jean Wan had gone on a business trip and stayed in Canada for another half a month before returning. As soon as she returned, she had been busy with the construction project of High City Stadium. She worked overtime, read plans, and went to the construction site for inspection. As long as she could, she would take a look at every process. It was already the end of August, and she had been back from England for more than 2 months, almost 3 months. This time, the meeting with the construction bureau was still held in Shine Group, but today, most of the participants in the meeting were other members of Shine Group. Mo Jingshan was not there, so the meeting was not affected. She just needed to ask the people of Shine Group to inform the higher-ups. That night, after the meeting, Jean Wan dragged her tired body back to rest. After all, she had been so busy for the past half a month that she fell asleep as soon as she hit the bed. Now she just wanted to go back, take a shower, and sleep as soon as possible. However, when she walked out of Shine Group, she suddenly saw Shenmue parked the black Bugatti outside and motioned for Jean Wan to get in the car. Why did he want her to get in the car? Jean Wan glanced at Shenmue in confusion. Shenmue did not explain and only signaled for her to hurry up. The spot where he parked was not a normal parking spot, and there were cars passing by. If he kept parking here, it would affect other people's driving. Jean Wan thought Shenmue had something to say to her, so she walked over. When she approached, Shenmue looked back and motioned for her to sit in the back. She opened the car door in confusion and saw Mo Jingshan sitting in the back. Jean Wan, she wondered why Shenmue was so mysterious, but it turned out that he just wanted her to get in the car. Jean Wan pursed her lips and did not speak. Hearing the car behind her honking and telling them not to block the road, she got in the car. In the car, Mo Jingshan only glanced at her and tilted his head back. He raised his hand and casually tugged at the collar of his shirt. He must have had a dinner party and drank some wine. Right now, the alcohol was kicking in, and he was feeling a little uncomfortable sitting in the car for a long time. Shenmue started the car. Before Jean Wan could say whether she was going home or back to the company, Mo Jingshan opened his eyes and turned to look at her, wanting to see if she was looking at the scenery. However, from the corner of his eye, he saw that she was almost leaning against the door. The space in the back seat was not small, but she had forcibly widened the distance between them by about 1.5 meters. Chapter 494. The sky gradually darkened, and it was very dark inside the car. Shenmue's car drove very steadily, and it was as though he was purposely pretending he did not exist. He did not make a single sound, and at this moment, the car was so quiet that even Mo Jingshan's slightly drunk breathing could be heard clearly. You're almost pressed against the car door. If the door could be opened right now, would you even be able to jump out of the car? Mo Jingshan's tone was neither salty nor mild as he spoke. Due to the heavy atmosphere in the car, he casually unbuttoned one of the buttons on his collar. The man's collarbone that was usually meticulously buttoned was sexy and alluring. Coupled with the man's slightly low and hoarse voice, it caused one's heart to instinctively jump upon hearing it. Jean Wan did not look at him and shifted her gaze away. There's indeed no need for me to sit in this car. Earlier, if it wasn't because the car was blocking the road and I was too embarrassed to dawdle there and affect the passing of others, I wouldn't have come up. The man whom she had forcefully pulled away from her by 1.5 meters turned to look at her. His distant and heavy gaze landed on her face. I'm just sending you home. It's not like I'll eat you up. Why did his words sound as though she was the heartless and ungrateful one who did not understand good intentions? Good person? Mo Jingshan? Did he count? Jean Wan was expressionless as she looked out the window. She maintained her posture of leaning against the door and did not wish to approach him at all. All of a sudden, the car arrived at an intersection ahead. A speeding ambulance sped over from the other side of the road. Shenmu rushed to step on the emergency brake. Jean Wan was only sitting on the seat closest to the side. Not only was she not wearing her seatbelt, but she was also unstable. In an instant, the inertia and force of the emergency brake sent her entire body forward. Her head knocked against the nearest window, and her elbow knocked against the door. The pain caused her to softly cry out in pain, but she held it in and did not make another sound. She only raised her hand to press against her slightly aching forehead. Shenmu looked at Jean Wan through the rearview mirror and said apologetically, "I'm sorry." Earlier, an ambulance suddenly sped over. It was probably rushing to the hospital to save someone's life. I had no choice but to suddenly brake. "Miss G, are you all right?" Jean Wan shook her head and did not speak. She just raised her hand and waved twice, indicating that she was fine, and then continued to lean against the car door. However, less than 5 minutes later, the car passed another traffic light intersection and suddenly made a sharp turn in the middle of the intersection. Before she could react, she was thrown away from the car door. Before she realized what was going on, she fell sideways toward Mo Jingshan. She had just realized this and was about to dodge, but she couldn't bear the inertia of the sudden turn. She couldn't control her body at all and instantly fell sideways on the man's lap. Her head also hit hard against his lower abdomen uncontrollably. The area below her head was currently pressed against Jean Wan. She didn't have the time to ask Shenmu why he suddenly made a sharp turn, nor was she in a rush to ask why he was driving the car as though it was drifting in the city. Jean Wan quickly sat up and moved away from the man's lap. She then raised her hand to push back the messy hair on his lap and sat stiffly in her seat. Mo Jingshan's gaze was deep as he looked at the woman beside him who had an awkward expression but was unwilling to speak. After she had tidied up her hair, he saw that it was only shoulder length. Just as Jean Wan was about to continue leaning against the door, he abruptly raised his hand to hold her wrist and pulled her back. Jean Wan almost fell into his embrace again. She rushed to steady herself and leaned against the door. At the same time, she stared in shock at the man beside her with his deep gaze. "What are you doing?" As she spoke, she subconsciously wanted to move to the side. However, her arm was instantly held tightly by him. "Ahem, sorry. Earlier on, I forgot to turn at that intersection and almost drove over. Thankfully, I made the turn in time." Shenmu, who was in the driver's seat, did not turn back or look at the rearview mirror. He only gave a perfunctory explanation. Jean Wan was speechless. Shenmu, this bastard. Although he didn't brake on purpose earlier, the turn earlier was definitely intentional. Jean Wan moved to withdraw her hand from Mo Jingshan's palm. However, the man turned around by her side and pressed his long arm against her shoulder, trapping her between the leather car seat and his body. When Jean Wan's cold gaze landed on him, his black eyes narrowed and he wrapped his arm around her shoulder, trapping her in his embrace. Finally, he saw the coldness in Jean Wan's eyes turn into shock and resistance. However, all her struggles were easily suppressed by him. Instead, the two of them moved even closer to each other. She was almost pressed against the seat by him, unable to move at all. "Mo Jingshan, what are you doing?" In the darkness of the car, Jean Wan's complexion turned slightly pale due to his forceful approach. The man placed one hand on the back of the seat behind her and held her with the other, trapping her in his cool breath. He lowered his eyes and looked at her unhappy face from such a close distance. Her slender and soft body kept struggling in his embrace. His gaze was dark and heavy as he said, "Get out of the car." She could clearly feel that these two words were not meant for her. He was asking Shenmu to get out of the car. Jean Wan stared at him in disbelief. "Mo Jingshan. What do you mean?" However, Shenmu had already parked the car by the side of the road in a timely manner. Then, he quickly disappeared from the car. The moment the driver's door was slammed shut with a pang, Jean Wan's heart leaped to her throat. It was one feeling to have a third person in the car, but it was definitely another feeling when it was only her and Mo Jingshan in the car. Don't move. If you move again, I can't guarantee what will happen in this car. The man's voice was low and warm. He looked into her eyes and suddenly chuckled, but his voice was low. You know, I drank tonight. Jean Wan froze and stared in disbelief at the man who openly expressed his intention to commit violence while drunk. Her heart felt stifled. So, just because he smelled of alcohol, he wanted to take the opportunity to act crazily? Jean Wan immediately sneered mockingly. For so long, she had thought that she could be tactful and maintain a proper distance with him, but she did not expect that one day, Mo Jingshan could also be so shameless to this extent. Chapter 495. With that, she pushed hard against his chest but failed. She said coldly and angrily, Mo Jingshan, you've tortured me enough 3 years ago. Now it's all over. Please let me go. Let's part on good terms. Don't make me suspect that you've fallen in love with a game of cat and mouse. I just want to stay far away from you. Go as far as you can. Before she finished speaking, Jean Wan tried to move aside again. All of a sudden, the cell phone in her bag rang with a melodious ringtone. She immediately raised her eyes and coldly stared at him. When the man paused slightly because of her cell phone ringing, she took the opportunity to push him away harshly. She hurriedly moved aside and picked up her cell phone. When she saw that the caller ID was Mr. Vince's number, she recalled that she hadn't received his call or heard any news about him in the past half a month. Even if they didn't have time to meet in the past, Mr. Vince would often call to ask about her well-being. It seemed that they hadn't contacted each other in the past half a month. Jean Wan only hesitated for a moment before answering the call. Hello, Mr. Vince. Jean Wan calmed her slightly ragged breathing due to the violent struggle earlier. Mo Jingshan watched her try to suppress her calm expression as she answered the phone. When he heard her soft and gentle voice when she called him Mr. Vince, his expression darkened slightly. Mr. Vince asked on the phone, You're back. You've been in Canada for so many days. Are you all right? I'm fine. It's just some work. I can't leave there. I just came back 2 days ago. Jean Wan's breathing had calmed down, and her voice sounded gentler and more patient than before. It was very quiet in the car, so quiet that Jean Wan could hear the man's voice clearly on the phone. Mr. Vince smiled gently. That's good. I'm also abroad these days. I don't have time to go back in the near future. You can contact the vice president of BGY Group. If you have any problems, call me. I'll try to help you. Why did you go out again? Didn't you say you'd stay in the country for a while? Isn't BGY Group about to promote you? My promotion won't be delayed, but I'll probably be in charge of the branch companies in other regions. It may be a long time before I can return to High City. Mr. Vince's voice did not reveal any emotion, but Jean Wan somehow felt that he had something on his mind. But after all, this was a job transfer. No matter what kind of worries he had, it was not something she should ask. Usually, she wouldn't say much. She would just wish him the best, but when she raised her eyes to meet Mo Jingshan's gaze, she pursed her lips. She didn't know what she was thinking, but perhaps she was really angered to the point of rebelling. She subconsciously said, Then be good outside. Come back soon, take good care of yourself, and don't make me worry. The moment the woman's words left her mouth, Mo Jingshan listened to her soft and sweet voice. His eyes narrowed and he did not say a word. However, the sudden change in her tone made Mr. Vince feel something was wrong. Although he was touched by her rare concern for him, he still asked, Who are you with now? Before Jean Wan could speak, the phone in her hand was suddenly taken by Mo Jingshan. She raised her eyes to glare at him, only to see that the man was holding her phone and indifferently and coldly spitting out a word. Me. With that, without waiting for the other party's response, he hung up and tossed the phone onto the seat by her side. Jean Wan forcibly swallowed back the curses on the tip of her tongue. She gritted her teeth to resist the urge to scold him, picked up the phone angrily, and put it back into her bag. She turned to see that the car was parked in a parking space at an intersection. She immediately reached out to open the car door, only to find that it was locked. The same thing again. Even Shenmue had learned this trick. He had already gotten out of the car, so why did he still lock the car door? Jean Wan knitted her brows. She found that she was actually a little afraid of staying with Mo Jingshan like this, especially in such an enclosed space where his scent was everywhere. Seeing that she sat stiffly by the car door, the man suddenly leaned over. Jean Wan immediately leaned back against the car door and stared at him with an ugly expression. Mo Jingshan, you didn't drink much at all. Don't act recklessly just because you're tipsy. Although I don't know what your purpose is, I know that you're very sober. Mo Jingshan was unmoved. He just leaned close to her, their breaths entwined, but he did not restrain her. But in fact, it was the same whether he held her down or not, because she could not get out of the car. His eyes were deep and heavy, but hers were cold and full of resistance. Remove Vince from your relationships. If I see you have any contact with him again, he can forget about taking a step into High City in this life. The man coldly spat out these words and then released her under Jean Wan's stunned gaze. It was clear that his headache these days was real. He sat back in his seat, pressed his slender fingers between his brows, and did not say another word. Jean Wan stiffly leaned against the car door for a long time before she gradually returned to herself. Was it you who prevented Mr. Vince from returning to High City for the time being? No, for the sake of him helping you through several difficulties, I won't touch him. Mo Jingshan put down his hand that was originally pressed against his brows and turned to look at her guarded eyes. But if you continue to maintain an ambiguous relationship with him, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to control my hand. After confirming that he was not despicable enough to touch Mr. Vince, Jean Wan's heart finally calmed down a little. But what did this mean? A threat? She coldly looked at him. Isn't Shine Group very busy? But why do I see that you're so free that you even care about your ex-wife's love life? We divorced a long time ago, didn't we? Emotionally, we broke up, and legally, we have no relationship. Why do you care if I have an ambiguous relationship with Mr. Vince or some other guy? As she spoke, Jean Wan's face turned a little pale. At this time, Shenmue opened the car door and returned to the car. The moment the door was opened, the lights in the car automatically turned on, clearly illuminating Jean Wan's pale face. Mo Jingshan glanced at her and then glanced at her, seemingly inadvertently covering her stomach with her hand. He glanced at the time and asked in a low voice, "Didn't you have lunch?" Jean Wan was too lazy to talk to him. Seeing that she had been discovered, she no longer hid. She covered her stomach with her hand and gently rubbed it, not speaking or responding to his words. Chapter 496. Jean Wan didn't particularly like Western food. She liked Chinese restaurants or home-cooked meals, which was her habit. Knowing what Mo Jingshan meant, she looked out of the window expressionlessly. No, thank you, CEO Mo. I can go home and cook some noodles. You don't have to spend so much money on me. She paused and then said, "Of course, it doesn't seem necessary for me to treat you to dinner, so please let me get out of the car and let me go home by myself." She changed the way she addressed him to CEO Mo again. Shenmue pretended not to hear anything. The car had almost reached a good restaurant nearby, and he slowed down the car. Jean Wan's attitude didn't soften at all. She was even colder than when she got in the car. Mo Jingshan didn't seem to want to force her. He said indifferently, "Send her back." "Oh, okay." Shenmue continued to speed up the car. As he drove the car in the direction of where Jean Wan used to live, he deliberately asked, "Miss G, are you still living in the previous apartment?" I'll just take you there, right? Jean Wan paused. No, I moved. Now I live close to the company, in the West City. Shenmue immediately turned the car around in time and drove in the direction of the West City. As he drove, he said, "Oh, fortunately I asked. Otherwise, I would have gone in the wrong direction." "Where do you live in the West City now?" "Send me back to the company. It's only a 10-minute walk from the company to home. I'll go back to the company to pick up something." Jean Wan's voice was flat and emotionless. Shenmue hesitated. Seeing in the rearview mirror that Mo Jingshan didn't seem to want to speak, he could only say cooperatively, "Okay." Jean Wan thought it seemed that they didn't know where she had moved. So, the reason why Mo Jingshan knew where she lived was because he already knew it 3 years ago? Previously, in Yuehu Bay, people often asked about the mysterious owner. Because the mysterious owner seemed to have an unusual identity, she once suspected that he might have something to do with Mo Jingshan. Although she didn't know why she had that suspicion, when she saw the various kinds of furniture moved in by the workers, she felt that the style was very similar to that of Aolan International. But now that she thought about it, maybe it was just a coincidence. That kind of simple and elegant black and white decoration and the style of the furniture should be the style that many modern men liked. She was probably thinking too much. Now that she saw that Shenmue seemed to be completely unaware of her new residence, she must have been overthinking. After driving to the west side of the city, Jean Wan saw that they were getting closer and closer to Yuehu Bay. She glanced into the distance and did not stop at Yuehu Bay. It was very quiet in the car. Mo Jingshan was resting with his eyes closed and did not say a word. Shenmue didn't look in the direction of Yuehu Bay either. He drove through the main gate and headed straight for the MN Group's office building. She thought Shenmue was going to stop the car and was about to say, "Thank you," when he slowly opened his eyes and said, "You haven't had lunch since noon. No matter how busy you are, you don't have to make things difficult for your stomach. Get out of the car and go eat something." Shenmue was about to stop the car when he opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "You haven't eaten anything since noon." There were some cafes and restaurants around the plaza in front of the office building, as well as some other restaurants. Jean Wan said coldly without raising her eyes, "No need. I'm not hungry." Mo Jingshan's handsome features were still indifferent as if what she saw was just an illusion. His voice was cold and low. "You're not hungry? Then eat with me." Jean Wan turned to glare at him. "CEO Mo, I think you're really drunk. I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat. Why should I eat with you?" The man looked at her cold and even obviously alienated face and remembered her soft tone when she answered the phone just now. He immediately glanced at her coldly. "You can have dinner with Vince, but you can't have dinner with me?" Who would have thought that there would be a day when she could hear that Mo Jingshan was calculative in his words? Jean Wan withdrew her gaze and curved her lips, but she was not really smiling. "You've said it yourself. Mr. Vince has helped me through several difficult times in the past 3 years. It's understandable for me to treat him to a meal, but why would I want to have a meal with you? At most, CEO Mo and I will toast each other on social occasions. It's not appropriate for us to have dinner together in private near my company, is it?" Mo Jingshan's hand that had opened the car door paused. He suddenly turned to look at her and closed the door again. Hearing the sound of the car door closing, Jean Wan's heart sank and she instinctively looked at him warily. "Aren't you going to get out of the car? I'll give you 2 choices. Get out of the car to eat, or stay in the car tonight. Choose." The man looked at her cold face and his voice was indifferent as if it really had nothing to do with him. "After all, I'm not the one who's hungry and has a stomachache, en?" Jean Wan, she did have a stomachache, but she didn't want to compromise. But just now, when she saw the car door that she had opened with great difficulty was closed again, it seemed that she had missed the opportunity to escape because of her stubbornness. This man was Mo Jingshan, a man who could make countless rich and powerful people tremble with a casual stomp of his foot. Everyone had to give way to him and didn't dare to provoke him. What else did she have except that she had a relationship with him several years ago? What right did she have to provoke or disobey him? Jean Wan lowered her eyes and said flatly, "CEOMO, what do you want to eat?" "Anything. It's up to you." He had just come back from a dinner party and drank some wine, so he must have eaten, but generally, he didn't eat too much at this kind of dinner party. As soon as Shenmu drove the car to a beef noodle shop in front of her company, Jean Wan said, "Shenmu, park the car here." Shenmu stopped the car decisively. After the car stopped, Jean Wan opened the door and got out of the car without saying a word. Then, regardless of whether Mo Jingshan followed her or not, she quickly walked into the beef noodle shop and found an empty seat to sit down. The waiter came over and asked her what she wanted to eat. Jean Wan said a bowl of beef noodle. As soon as she finished speaking, she looked up and saw that Mo Jingshan had come in. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, clear, and clean, without any trace of drunkenness. She paused and coldly corrected herself. 2 bowls. It wasn't until the waiter turned and left that Jean Wan put down her bag and no longer looked at the man in front of the door. This was a very ordinary beef noodle shop. It was very small, and the tables were not big, but there were many people. The smell of beef noodle wafted in the air, and the environment was relatively clean. With Great Boss Mo's status, he probably rarely came to such a small place, or maybe he had never been here before. The moment Jean Wan raised her eyes again, she saw that the man in front of the door had turned his eyes away after looking at the shop. He took long strides and walked in her direction. Chapter 497. When the man's jade-like figure was standing less than 2 meters away from her, he came over and sat down. Mo Jingshan didn't mind this kind of small restaurant at all. He just sat opposite her. For some reason, Jean Wan felt that the beef noodle restaurant, which had become narrower because of the crowded people, suddenly became particularly quiet, and the man sitting opposite her was particularly clear. A handsome man with clear and perfect facial features appeared in front of her openly just like that. Mo Jingshan. Jean Wan recalled that there was a time when he was really everywhere in her world. As long as she had a little spare time, as long as she slightly let down her guard, he would openly appear in her mind. Later, she gradually got used to the fact that this man had disappeared from her world. She clearly knew that he had completely disappeared from her world. She hadn't even heard of Mo Jingshan's name for a long time before she returned to High City. Before the beef noodle restaurant was served, the waiter came over with a pot of the restaurant's homemade lemonade and poured it into a clean glass. Jean Wan didn't speak. Mo Jingshan put the glass of lemonade in front of her. She moved her eyes forward slightly, took the lemonade, and still didn't speak. When the 2 glasses of lemonade were poured, the waiter turned away. Mo Jingshan watched her gently rubbing the glass with her fingers but didn't drink it. He looked at her calmly with his deep eyes. In this small restaurant, it seemed that there was finally a place and space for her to have a good talk with him. "You've grown a lot, but you're still not ruthless enough." The man's voice was light, not high or low, but she could hear every word clearly. Jean Wan suddenly seemed to look at him as if she was surprised that he would come to such a conclusion. "What do you mean?" The man's smile deepened, but he still looked at her with clear eyes, and his voice was mixed with a trace of softness that she couldn't understand. "I've been waiting for you to vent your anger and give you a chance to vent your anger, but obviously this time the angle I expected is different." Jean Wan felt a little amused and said lightly, "So CEOMO is just giving me a chance to vent the grievances I suffered in front of you. Do you want me to be happy? The reason why your prediction is a little off is because you think I hate you. But the real reason is that I don't even hate you anymore. I just don't want you anymore." What was the most satisfying thing? After experiencing these 3 long years, I've finally completely forgotten you. That's the happiest feeling. She paused, and the mockery in her eyes became more obvious. "I don't even want to know why you insisted on divorcing me in the first place." The man had just picked up the glass on the table when he paused for a second or two because of her words. He put the glass down again and his voice was light and emotionless. Really? Jean Wan's cell phone rang again. She took it out of her bag and answered it when she saw it was Xia Tian. Nuanyuan, are you back to the company now? I'm downstairs. That's great. Last time I asked my SWAT boy to find a bodyguard for you, I found a suitable person. I'm at home with the baby, so I asked him to go to the company to find you. He went there in the afternoon and learned that you were not in the company, so he has been waiting for you. Where are you now? I'll ask him to go to see you. You really found me a bodyguard? In fact, it's not necessary. I'm quite safe living there now. Since you've already looked for him, why don't you just leave him here? It's better to have a little more security. After all, you're no longer a nobody, and your net worth is already in the Forbes list. You have to be careful of kidnappers or robbers. I'll feel more at ease if you have a bodyguard with you. Jean Wan chuckled. All right, I'm in the beef noodle shop downstairs. Okay, I'll ask him to go there right away. After hanging up the phone, the waiter happened to bring up 2 bowls of beef noodle that had just been made. Jean Wan took a sip of water unhurriedly and said, "This kind of small shop is clean. CEOMO, I hope you don't mind. If you don't like it, just put it down. You don't have to be too polite." Mo Jingshan didn't show any emotion on his face. He very naturally and skillfully put several slices of beef on the noodle shop into Jean Wan's bowl. Jean Wan glanced at the many slices of beef piled up in her bowl. Before she could speak, the door of the noodle shop was opened, and a thin and tall figure appeared in front of the door. It was a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. He had a neat black buzz cut, and his handsome face was a little tough and energetic. He quickly looked around, saw Jean Wan, looked down at the photos he had received on his cell phone, and then fixed his eyes on Jean Wan. Jean Wan's eyelids twitched. Was he the one Xia Tian mentioned? Hi. She came up to the table quickly and greeted Jean Wan. Are you Sister Wan? Jean Wan. Yes, just call me Jean Wan. Sure enough, it's you. The man at the table immediately sat down by Jean Wan's side as if he was very familiar with her. The tables and chairs in this shop were very retro. Jean Wan was sitting on a wooden bench, but because he suddenly sat down, she had to move aside a little to make room for him. Hello, Sister Wan, my name is Yan Gu. I'm an intern in High City's Special Police Force. In fact, I've been on many missions. After 2 years of internship, I can officially become a regular police officer, but I still need about half a year of social practice. Our boss Ling asked me to be a bodyguard for a female CEO, and he said that this female CEO is his wife's best friend, so I came without hesitation. Sister Wan, I'll be working for you from now on. Please take care of me. With that, this young and handsome man called Yan Gu raised his hand to shake Jean Wan's hand. Jean Wan looked at him up and down, asking, How old are you? 23. Yan Gu smiled again. His smile was young and sunny, showing his white teeth. His hand was still raised in front of her, insisting on shaking hands to get to know each other. Since he was 1 year younger than her, it was not too much for him to call her Sister Wan. Jean Wan raised her hand and shook his hand politely. She was about to speak, when Yan Gu looked at the untouched beef noodles on her table and said in surprise, Nowadays, CEOs like you come to this kind of restaurant to eat noodles? Jean Wan, shouldn't you all go to various star hotels to eat luxurious meals? Just like in the TV series. Jean Wan, she coughed. No matter how rich he was still a human. Why couldn't he eat beef noodles? Chapter 498. Hearing this, Yan Gu smiled again. Yes, I came here at 2:00 in the afternoon, but they said you went out for a meeting and didn't know when you would come back. Anyway, I had nothing to do in the afternoon, so I waited in the lounge downstairs of your company. I didn't expect that you would really come back. This big boy who loved to laugh made her feel less repulsed toward strangers. Furthermore, because he came from the special forces and was full of righteousness, she felt a little closer to him in her heart. This bowl of noodles has just been served. Eat it. Jean Wan pushed the bowl of noodles in front of her to Yen Gu. Yen Gu looked at her. Isn't this your noodles? Aren't you going to eat it, Sister Wan? I'm not hungry. If I'm hungry, I'll have another bowl. You eat first. Jean Wan picked up disposable sanitary chopsticks and handed them to him. Yen Gu was a little embarrassed, but he was really hungry. He hesitated and looked at Jean Wan. Jean Wan blinked at him and said with a smile, I'm on a diet. Hurry up and eat. Hearing that she was on a diet, Yen Gu smiled again. You girls are so thin, but you still say you want to lose weight every day. I'm really hungry. I'll eat it. Sister Wan, you also have another bowl. Don't be hungry. Jean Wan nodded. Yen Gu broke the chopsticks, lowered his head, and took a bite. Then he gave her a thumbs up with an admiring look. It tastes good. Really good. Jean Wan smiled. Seeing Yen Gu eat up all the pieces of meat in the noodles without hesitation, she seemed to remember something and looked up at the man sitting opposite her. Mo Jingshan didn't show any emotion on his cold face. He coldly looked at Yen Gu, who had eaten most of the noodles in a few mouthfuls, and said indifferently, Eat slowly. Don't choke. Yen Gu suddenly coughed and almost choked. He suddenly put down the chopsticks, looked up at the man sitting opposite him, and paused before turning his eyes to Jean Wan. When did this man sit here? Jean Wan, Yen Gu had been looking for Jean Wan since he came in and didn't look at anyone else. After sitting down, he didn't look in any other direction, so he didn't notice that there was someone sitting opposite him. Mo Jingshan, who had been treated as an invisible person for a long time, saw him move closer to Jean Wan as he spoke, and his cold eyes turned cold. Sister Wan, who is he? Do you know each other? Seeing his unkind look, Yen Ji's face immediately turned cold. He leaned closer to Jean Wan and asked in a low voice. Cough. Jean Wan casually took a few napkins from the table and handed them to Yen Gu, saying, They're just passers-by sharing a table. Just eat your food. Don't worry about others. Yen Gu looked at the surrounding tables and saw that all the tables were occupied. Therefore, the reason that passers-by came to share a table was very convincing. Oh. He glanced at the clothes of the man on the other side of the table. He was wearing a black shirt and trousers. They didn't look cheap, and his aura didn't look like that of an ordinary person. Yen Gu instantly felt a faint sense of worship towards this beef noodle restaurant. Just how delicious was this restaurant? Even two extraordinary people could come here for a meal. After a bowl of noodles, Yen Gu wiped his mouth with a napkin and called the waiter, Waiter, 2 more bowls. 2 bowls? Jean Wan was surprised. I'll have another bowl. You have to have another bowl too. Yen Gu turned his eyes to her and continued to smile at her, showing his white teeth. These bowls are on me. Sister Wan, eat as much as you want. The corner of Jean Wan's mouth twitched. Thank you, but I'm not hungry. You can eat by yourself. Seeing that she really didn't want to eat, Yen Gu thought for a while and decided that he couldn't eat 2 more bowls. In the end, he only ordered 1 bowl. Jean Wan could understand that a tall and strong young man like him, who had graduated from the special police force, could easily eat 1 or 2 bowls of beef noodle. Besides, Yen Gu didn't look fat at all. His tall and thin figure was one of the best among his peers. She sat by his side and waited for him to eat the noodles, not disturbing him. However, Jean Wan spoke to him with a smile and patiently handed him a napkin, all of which fell into Mo Jingshan's eyes. Jean Wan glanced at the bowl of noodles in front of Mo Jingshan. The noodles had been left here for more than 10 minutes and had become sticky. She glanced at him again, asking him why he hadn't eaten it yet. Mo Jingshan's lips curved into a cold smile. After Yen Gu ate most of the second bowl of noodles, he asked the waiter for a bottle of mineral water, took a sip, and put it down. He turned his eyes to Jean Wan, saying, Sister Wan, I'll be working for you from now on, right? Is this the first time you've hired a bodyguard? Have you ever had a bodyguard by your side before? My job is to keep you safe, isn't it? Jean Wan thought of Feng Ling, and the smile in her eyes softened. I used to have a female bodyguard by my side, but she's abroad now. I don't think she'll come back anytime soon. A female bodyguard? How's her martial arts? She won the Women's Close Combat Championship in the United States and is a shooting coach in some special bases. What do you think of her martial arts? Jean Wan asked with a smile. Yen Gu nodded. Then I see. Sister Wan, don't worry. I'm good at martial arts. I can definitely keep you safe. Jean Wan looked at his serious face and then at the noodles in his hand. She chuckled. Why is your name Yen Gu? I think it should be Yen Gu. Hurry up and eat your noodles. Let's talk about work tomorrow. Seeing that Jean Wan was not a cold and unapproachable boss, Yen Gu continued to eat a big mouthful of noodles in a good mood and didn't continue to talk. At this time, Shen Mu came in from outside. He came to Mo Jingshan's side and said something in a low voice. It seemed that he had something to do. Mo Jingshan took a look at Jean Wan and Yen Gu, who was still eating noodles. His eyes darkened, he silently threw the bill on the table, and indifferently got up to leave. As soon as the man left, Jean Wan's eyes fell on the bill on the table. In the past, Mo Jingshan rarely carried money with him. He had to pay by credit card to accompany her to buy groceries. She didn't expect that now he had the habit of carrying money with him. Habit? Habit was a terrible thing. She had just quit it for a year or two, so she didn't want to be stained with it again. The door of the beef noodle restaurant opened and closed. Jean Wan picked up the glass and took a sip of water, remaining silent. After eating the noodles, Yen Gu looked up at the 100 yuan on the table and said in surprise, "This passerby is really fastidious. Is this his treat? Are all the bosses so generous now? We just share a table. How can he take the initiative to treat us?" Jean Wan, but why hasn't his bowl of noodles been touched? Hey! Didn't the waiter check the noodles when he brought them up? Why isn't there any meat in his bowl? Chapter 499. A week later, Jean Wan was about to go out of the company in the afternoon to talk about a new project with room for development in China, when she suddenly received a call. The call was from the Mo family. She learned that a few days ago, grandfather Mo suddenly fainted at home because of heart palpitations caused by high blood pressure and was rushed to the hospital. It took him more than a day to get out of danger. After staying in the hospital for a few days, he was discharged from the hospital and returned to the Mo family yesterday. But grandfather Mo was now recuperating in bed at home, clamoring to see Jean Wan every day when he woke up. Uncle O, the housekeeper, was worried that grandfather Mo's bad mood would affect his health, so he called Jean Wan, hoping that she could spare some time to go to the Mo family these days to see grandfather Mo. As soon as she heard that grandfather Mo was in a coma and hospitalized, Jean Wan stood up from the sofa. Then she heard that grandfather Mo was still recuperating at home these days and could not walk by himself, clamoring to see her every day. Without saying a word, she postponed all her afternoon schedule, asked Yen Gu to help her go to a nearby pharmacy to buy various expensive herbs and supplements for lowering blood pressure, and then drove all the way to the Mo family. 3 years ago, Jean Wan avoided seeing grandfather Mo. The only person she felt guilty about was grandfather Mo. Grandfather Mo's words were still ringing in her ears. He had always kept the position of the Mo family's granddaughter-in-law for her. She thought that after 3 years, grandfather Mo should have let it go and no longer be so persistent, but she didn't expect that he would often talk about her and miss her in his illness. Sometimes people were like this. They often felt that no one would disappear in their lives, until one day they found that the person accompanying them was getting older and closer to the end of his life. When they tried to hold on to this person again, they found that they couldn't be held back. Grandfather Mo was already in his 80s. Unlike young people like them, he couldn't stand the ravages of time. Jean Wan couldn't help speeding up, and the guilt and regret in her heart grew stronger. 3 years ago, she should have at least seen him before leaving. She could be ruthless to anyone and anything, but to Grandfather Mo, she really shouldn't have been so heartless. Sister Wan, there's a speed limit here. Drive slowly. If you are too worried, why don't you sit here and I'll drive? Yen Gu sat in the co-driver's seat and saw Jean Wan driving almost 100 on a road with a speed limit of 60. Although there were not many cars on the road and it was not dangerous, he could see that she seemed to be in a bad mood. It's fine. I just want to hurry over to see Grandfather Mo, Jean Wan said as she increased the speed of the car, completely ignoring the speed limit signs. After this week, Yen Gu knew that Jean Wan was a very rational and sensible person. Now that he saw her gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her slender knuckles turned white, he didn't say anything else. The car soon arrived at the Mo family's old residence. It had been more than 3 years since she last set foot on this place. The moment Jean Wan got out of the car, she took a look at the Mo family's old residence. It was the end of August, not yet autumn. The weather was hot, but the shady paths and colorful flower beds in the old residence's yard were still there. It was full of vitality as if nothing had changed in the past 3 years and everything remained the same. Having no time to appreciate the scenery in the yard, Jean Wan drove the car to the parking lot in the front yard of the old house. When she parked, she noticed that the familiar black ghost was also here. Mo Jingshan also returned to the Mo family? Yes, the reason why he returned to High City when his relationship with Mo Xiaoza was in a stalemate was that Grandpa Mo was here. Although he was busy and had no time to come back, Grandpa Mo was sick. No matter how busy he would come back. After all, the Mo family couldn't be without a leader. Grandpa Mo was sick. If he didn't go back to the Mo family at this time, it would be really inappropriate. Jean Wan was not in the mood to think about this now. She just wanted to see how Grandpa Mo was doing. Walking in, she saw Uncle O. As soon as Uncle O saw her, the old man, who was almost the same age as Grandpa Mo, suppressed his excitement and came up to greet her. Mrs. Mo, Jean Wan paused, swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth, and smiled. Uncle O, are you still healthy? Uncle O nodded. I'm fine. I'm really healthy. In fact, Grandpa Mo has always been in good health, but after all, he is old. When he was young, he worked too hard, and when he was old, all kinds of diseases came to him. Fortunately, it's just high blood pressure, which is not fatal. After he fainted, he was sent to the hospital in time. Everything was done in time, so it's not a big deal. He just needs to rest for a while, but Grandpa Mo talks about you every day. I'm afraid that if he suddenly passes away one day, I won't even be able to see him for the last time. Jean Wan's eyes suddenly turned red. No, Grandpa Mo has always been in good health. I guess he has been eating and drinking too greasy recently, so his high blood pressure suddenly became so serious. I'll go to see him. Okay, it's good that you can come back to see him, but Grandpa Mo has just taken his medicine and fallen asleep. I was afraid that he would be too excited, so I didn't tell him that you were coming back. Do you want to see him after he wakes up? He can sleep for about 2 or 3 hours. It's already afternoon, and it will be dark when he wakes up. Mrs. Mo, you can stay here tonight. Uncle O said with a kind smile, Mr. Mo happens to be here. He just went to see Grandpa Mo take his medicine and will come back in a minute. Yen Gu stood beside Jean Wan, carrying a lot of expensive herbs and tonics in his hand, but after listening for a long time, he felt a little strange. What, Mrs. Mo? Wasn't Sister Wan single? She had never seen any man around her. Why did this old man call her Mrs. Mo? I'll wait for Grandpa Mo to wake up. Jean Wan didn't decide whether to stay here or not. If Mo Jingshan was not here, she might consider staying at the Mo family for one night. After all, she just came back to see Grandpa Mo, but if Mo Jingshan was here, she'd better not stay here. After all, there was no reason for her to stay here. With that, she turned back, took the things in Yen Ji's hand, and handed them to Uncle O. No matter whether the Mo family lacked these things or not, this was the etiquette for the younger generation to visit the old. Uncle O was used to it. He took the things and didn't say anything but just asked Jean Wan to hurry to the front hall to sit down and drink tea and rest for a while. Yen Gu followed Jean Wan to the front hall. Seeing that Jean Wan seemed to be very familiar with the environment here, he couldn't help asking, Sister Wan, who is the Mr. Mo that Uncle O just mentioned? And who is Mrs. Mo? Did he call the wrong person? In the front yard of the Mo family, in the Chinese-style attic where Grandpa Mo was sleeping, the window was bright. The man's figure stood in front of the window, silently watching the woman walking through the shade of the trees in the front yard of the Mo family's house, and then coldly glanced at the overly enthusiastic bodyguard beside her. The bodyguard that Xia Tian tried to find for her? He must have deliberately come to annoy him. Chapter 500. She pushed open the window, and a gust of wind brought the woman's voice over. Yes, Uncle O, you called the wrong person. There's no Mrs. Mo here. Jean Wan sat in the front hall for a while, chatting with Uncle O from time to time. When she saw Mo Pylon passing through the back door, she took a look at her. Mo Pylon obviously didn't expect to see Jean Wan in the Mo family after a few years. She glanced at Jean Wan and her face darkened. Then she turned and walked away. Why is Aunt here? Jean Wan remembered that Grandfather Mo had said that he had driven away all the relatives who wanted to be related to the Mo family in a fit of anger. Logically speaking, among those who were driven away, Aunt Mo Pylon should be the first to bear the brunt, but now she actually saw her in the Mo family? Uncle O shook his head and sighed. You don't know. She has been living with the Mo family for some time with her daughter, Mo Joshua. Grandpa Mo is getting old, and he is not as healthy as he used to be. He doesn't have a daughter, so he needs someone to take care of him. Alas, 2 years ago, Mo Joshua married a bank owner. Originally, she thought that she could become rich and powerful. However, the man spent all day drinking and having a lot of women. In the end, she still ended up with a divorce. Joshua followed the same path as her mother. She got divorced not long after she got married. Fortunately, she didn't get pregnant, so she didn't live alone with a child for more than 20 years like her mother. Now the mother and daughter have no one to rely on. Mo Pylon is old and has not been able to find a good backer. Joshua is only 27 years old, but after all, no matter who she finds, it will be her second marriage. Both mother and daughter are proud and arrogant people. It's not easy for them to find someone they like. Seeing them staying at the Mo family's house all day, Master Mo knew that they had nowhere to go. He pitied them and felt pity for them. For the sake of their old friendship, he didn't drive them away and let them stay. Jean Wan nodded. Grandpa Mo doesn't have a daughter. It's good to have a niece to take care of him. Uncle O smiled. Although the old master is old, he is still soft-hearted. Mo Pylon and Mo Joshua have been living here for the past 2 years, so we let them live here. Dutiful? Jean Wan recalled that when she suddenly saw Mo Pylon just now, this aunt's originally peaceful eyes suddenly seemed to be pierced with thorns, as if she was facing a formidable enemy, as if Jean Wan's sudden appearance here would occupy her territory. Everyone in the Mo family knew about Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan's divorce. She just came back to visit Grandfather Mo, but from Mo Pylon's expression just now, it was clear that she didn't intend to play her part. 2 hours later, it was already 5:30 in the evening. It was dinner time, and the kitchen was preparing dinner. Elder Mo had also woken up. After hearing that Jean Wan had come to the Mo family, he was so excited that he immediately got out of bed. However, fearing that the smell of medicine on this bedridden old man would be too strong, he specially changed his clothes before heading to the front hall. The door of the front hall was opened by Uncle O, and a handsome man pushed Grandfather Mo in a wheelchair. The man behind the wheelchair was noble and indifferent, and his deep, dark eyes were like two bottomless pools of ink. Jean Wan is here, isn't she? The moment Jean Wan heard the voice, she abruptly stood up, deliberately avoiding the man's gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, she saw Elder Mo. When she saw that the elder was actually sitting in a wheelchair, her nose immediately turned sour. She forced a smile. Grandfather Mo didn't care whether Jean Wan called him grandfather or Grandfather Mo. He just stared at her with a smile. He was sitting in an automatic wheelchair with a button. After being pushed into the front hall by Mo Jingshan, he could walk on the ground autonomously. He pressed the button and approached Jean Wan. Jean Wan was afraid that Grandfather Mo and the wheelchair would hit the corner of the table and chair in the front hall, so she hurriedly stepped forward, pressed the armrest of the wheelchair, and leaned over to Grandfather Mo to say, "Grandfather Mo, I'm here. Don't worry. There are all kinds of sandalwood tables and chairs you like here. They are very strong. It hurts if you touch the corner of the table. Be careful." As she spoke, she directly pushed the old man's wheelchair to the front where there were fewer tables and chairs. The old man was in an extremely good mood and couldn't restrain his excitement. He took her hand and placed it in his palm. He patted her hand with his other hand and said emotionally, "Child, you've been gone for 3 years. Do you really think this old man can live so long and leave home for so many years as I please?" It was a divorce, but she turned it into running away from home. It was as if Jean Wan had never really left home. Sure enough, Grandfather Mo was considerate. Jean Wan smiled softly. "Grandfather Mo, let alone 3 years, it's common to see people in their hundreds now. It's not a problem for you to live for another 30 years. Humph, you're such a sweet girl. If I live for another 30 years, I'll be an old monster." Grandfather Mo snorted at her like a child. Jean Wan immediately smiled. Her hand was still held by the old man, but she didn't rush to withdraw it. She just patiently leaned over the wheelchair and said softly, "A few days ago, I heard from Uncle O that you fainted because of high blood pressure. Fortunately, it's just high blood pressure. Remember to drink less and eat less greasy high-calorie food in the future. Eat more light dishes. Do you think I have high blood pressure just because I drink a little wine and eat good food?" Grandfather Mo snorted again and held Jean Wan's hand tightly. "I know you've come back to China, but you haven't come to see me. I'm so angry." Jean Wan was embarrassed. The old man rolled his eyes at her and harumphed. "Look at you. Back then, you and Jingshan were so close and inseparable. In the end, you didn't even tell me about the divorce. Back then, I waited for you downstairs at your company for so long, but you refused to see me. Do you know how sad I was at the time?" Jean Wan lowered her eyes. Grandfather Mo, seeing that Jean Wan didn't want to mention what happened 3 years ago, Grandfather Mo let go of her hand and sighed. "Forget it. You didn't want to see me at that time because you didn't dare to. Anyway, I vented my anger on Jingshan, and he was beaten by me several times. At least you returned to China safely, so I won't mention it." Chapter 501. There were a lot of people present, and there were many servants of the Mo family around. It was not convenient for Jean Wan to ask them anything, so she withdrew her gaze and pushed Grandpa Mo to the dining table to sit down. "Grandpa, don't be so hot-tempered. Don't always be angry with us young people. You'd better take care of yourself." Jean Wan helped Grandpa Mo to the dining table and gestured to the servant to serve the dishes. Just now, the kitchen had prepared dinner and had been waiting for Grandpa Mo. Jean Wan thought that Mo Pailan and her mother would come for dinner, but the helper went to call for them and came back alone, saying, "They said that they ate something in the afternoon and aren't hungry. They won't be coming for dinner tonight." Grandpa Mo didn't say much but just smiled and asked Jean Wan to sit next to him. Grandpa Mo always liked to drink a few mouthfuls of wine at dinner. Now he had not recovered, so he couldn't drink, but he really wanted to drink, so Uncle O planned to bring a jar of the Mo family's old medicinal wine for Grandpa Mo to drink. The medicinal wine was good for his body, so he could drink a few mouthfuls. Jean Wan was not in a hurry to sit down. She avoided Grandpa Mo's dark eyes and quickly followed Uncle O out to help him. Seeing Jean Wan follow him out, Uncle O picked up a jar of medicinal wine with a smile and said, "How heavy is such a small jar of wine? I can carry it myself. Why do you suddenly follow me out? Do you have something to ask me?" Jean Wan smiled. "Uncle O, I'm really here to help." Uncle O smiled and didn't say more. As he walked back with her, he said, "I know what you want to ask. 3 years ago, Grandpa Mo didn't see you. After you flew to London, Mr. Mo didn't explain what happened between you and him. He just said that it was his decision to divorce you and that you were forced to leave, so it was not your fault. Even if he was heartless to the Mo family, it was not your fault." In a fit of anger, Elder Mo raised his walking stick and hit Mr. Mo. All the hits landed squarely on his back. That walking stick was made of redwood. It was hard and sturdy, but it broke in the end. "How hard do you think he hit him?" Jean Wan's footsteps suddenly stopped. "At that time, I was watching from the side. I couldn't stop him even if I wanted to." The old man was in a fit of anger and Mr. Mo took all the blame. He just stood there without saying a word or dodging. The old man raised his walking stick and smashed it against his back, but Mr. Mo didn't even frown. In the end, the walking stick broke and the old man sat down angrily. When Mr. Mo left, I saw that the back of his shirt was soaked. Even if it wasn't to the extent that his skin was torn, it definitely wasn't any better. Jean Wan lowered her eyes, and her heart seemed to be stung by something. Mo Jingshan's back was covered with old wounds from Cambodia and Los Angeles. Even if the wounds had already healed, they couldn't withstand that kind of devastation. 3 years ago, it had only been a few months since his wounds had healed. Grandfather Mo had hit him on the back with his walking stick, and those especially serious old wounds had most likely burst open. His shirt was soaked, which meant that his wounds had really burst open from the beating. That kind of pain that connected the bones and flesh, just by imagining it, one could imagine how painful it was. Uncle O sighed again. Ever since he was a child, the old man has never beaten him, but for you, he broke his crutch directly. Alas, Jean Wan stopped outside the front hall. That was all Uncle O could say. He thought about it and didn't say anything more. He didn't urge her to go in but walked into the front hall alone with a jar of wine in his hand. Jean Wan was a little confused. Mo Jingshan of the past was reflected in her eyes. He had said that trust was the foundation of marriage. He had said that he would never divorce her. But in the end, he had pushed her away and said that the Mo Jingshan who had promised her everything was already dead. So he was no longer the man she believed in love with, no longer the man who could risk his life for her, and no longer the man who broke his vows to kill for her in Cambodia. He said he had died in that car accident. Even though she knew it was false, she gradually convinced herself that it was true in the following 3 years. She just thought that he was a man with the same face as the old Mo Jingshan. That was all. But Uncle O told her that 3 years ago, after she left, Mo Jingshan was beaten by the old man and admitted that he forced her to leave. Jean Wan looked at the brightly lit front hall. At this time, Yen Gu came back from outside. Seeing Jean Wan standing outside like a statue, he raised his hand and waved it in front of her eyes. "Sister Wan? What are you daydreaming about? Why are you standing outside? To feed the mosquitoes?" Jean Wan returned to herself and glanced at him. "Where did you go earlier?" "I went to the entrance of the Mo's mansion to take a look and familiarize myself with the environment outside. If anything happens here, I can take you away at any time. Isn't this the duty of a bodyguard? What could possibly happen to me here? It's very safe in the Mo residence." You don't have to familiarize yourself with the surroundings. Rest for a while. Ah. Are you really familiar with this place? Are you really Mrs. M.O.? Aren't you single, Sister Nguyen? The corner of Jean Nguyen's mouth twitched. She pushed him back into the front hall and told him to hurry up to eat. The tall young man with a crew cut let out a cry of ouch and finally went in. Jean Nguyen glanced inside and turned to walk down the stairs in front of the front hall. Her heart was stuffy and she wanted to take a walk outside to get some fresh air. As soon as she went around to the shade behind the front hall, she suddenly heard someone talking. The voice seemed familiar. Jean Nguyen paused and instinctively stood behind a thick tree trunk. Did you see that? That Jean Nguyen is really back. I thought she had nothing to do with the M.O. family. I didn't expect that she would come as soon as the old man was discharged from the hospital. M.O. Pylan's voice was very low. Did you see her outside the front hall just now? The old man kept holding Jean Nguyen's hand as if she were his granddaughter-in-law. Mom, did you drag me out to peep just to see Jean Nguyen? M.O. Joshua's voice was low, and she still sounded quiet, timid, and self-abased. Chapter 502. But, when I went to help feed Grandpa the medicine this morning, Jingshan didn't even look at me. I didn't dare. M.O. Joshua lowered her head. Alas, you silly girl. M.O. Pylan patted her on the head exasperatedly. Instead of relying on your own ability to marry M.O. Jingshan, you might as well count on something else. You're really going to piss me off. M.O. Joshua felt wronged and didn't speak. M.O. Pylan raised her hand to touch her hair, looked at her face for a while, and then said, Do you still have the pajamas I bought for you last time? Yes, in the cabinet. Okay, we'll play it by ear tonight. Listen to me, and I'll find a way for you to be Mrs. Mo's wife. Even if you can't be Mrs. Mo's wife legitimately, at least you have to be pregnant with Mo's child. In this way, we can live here safely. Mom, what on earth do you want to do? Don't worry about it. Just listen to me tonight. Anyway, we can't let Jean Nguyen come back and abuse her power. After saying that, M.O. Pylan dragged M.O. Joshua along the other side of the path and walked back. While walking, she whispered something to her daughter. When the mother and daughter were far away, Jean Nguyen came out from behind the tree and glanced in that direction. Jean Nguyen even had a ridiculous thought. Was this aunt going to let her daughter rape M.O. Jingshan so that she could continue to live a happy life in the M.O. family? Even if M.O. Pylan had this idea, M.O. Joshua was so timid that she didn't even dare to raise her head in front of M.O. Jingshan. How could she do it? He was the president of Shine Group with an international reputation, but he was reduced to the point where the mother and daughter wanted to rape him and have a child. Well, she could only express her sympathy perfunctorily. When she returned to the front hall, she wanted to say something, but she didn't know whether to remind him or to ridicule him. But all this was disrupted by Yen Gu. Yen Gu had been staring at M.O. Jingshan since he entered the door. Uncle O knew this young man was Jean Nguyen's bodyguard, so he let him in, but why was he so surprised to see Mr. M.O. as if he had seen a ghost? Originally, Yen Gu wanted to sit down, but M.O. Jingshan stared at him without saying a word. Just his gaze made him feel as though he was sitting on pins and needles. He stood there for a long time but did not sit down. When Jean Nguyen came back, Yen Gu turned around, walked behind Jean Nguyen, and whispered, Sister Nguyen, this man looks very familiar. Is he the passerby who treated us to beef noodles that day? The corners of Jean Nguyen's eyes twitched. She had almost forgotten about this matter. She mumbled, Damn, what's going on? Wasn't he just a passerby? Why did you meet? I'll explain to you later. Jean Nguyen walked in, looked straight at Grandfather M.O., and walked towards him. When she passed by M.O. Jingshan's seat, Grandfather M.O. was about to ask her to sit there, but before he could speak, Jean Nguyen quickly bypassed him and sat down on the chair next to him. She was going to ask Yen Gu to eat with her, but after all, this was the M.O. family, and Grandfather Mo was still here, so Jin Wan couldn't make the decision. Uncle O came up to Yen Gu, who was still stunned, and said politely, "Young man, there is a spare small dining room in the front hall. You can take a rest on the sofa there after dinner. What do you want to eat? We'll ask the kitchen to send it to you after it's done." Although Yen Gu was a little impulsive, he knew the rules. He waved his hand at Jin Wan, telling her not to worry about him, and then turned to follow Uncle O. He successfully escaped from the man's piercing eyes. Jin Wan didn't know what to do. Jin Wan glanced at the crutch next to Grandfather Mo's wheelchair. She didn't pay much attention to it when she pushed him here, but after chatting with Uncle O, she couldn't help looking at the crutch. "Grandfather Mo, is your crutch new? I heard that the crutch you used to use was made of red wood, which you like very much. It has been used for many years. Why do you suddenly change it?" Jin Wan asked with a smile. As soon as she finished speaking, Mo Jingshan got up and said flatly, "I'll take a call." With that, he glanced at Grandfather Mo coldly, and his eyes were chilling. Then he turned and walked away, his back straight and steady, unhurried. There was a silence in the dining room, but Jin Wan was still looking at Grandfather Mo. Grandfather Mo calmed down and took a look at Jin Wan. "Did Uncle O tell you about the crutch?" Jin Wan didn't speak, but her eyes showed that she acquiesced. "Just pretend that you don't know." Just now, Mo Jingshan's attitude was very clear, and Grandfather Mo didn't go overboard with his words. He reached out to pick up the wine. "Grandfather Mo, although this is medicinal wine, you'd better not drink it. It's better not to drink wine when you have high blood pressure." Jin Wan didn't continue to ask but took the initiative to pour some wine for Grandfather Mo, but only a little, much less than if he had poured it himself. Seeing that Jin Wan was really doing this for his own good, Grandfather Mo said with a smile, "Okay, I'll listen to you. Girl G, stay at home tonight. I'll ask Jingshan to send you back tomorrow morning." "No, I drove here by myself. I'll leave after dinner with you. Just stay. I'll ask the servant to arrange another room for you. If you leave as soon as you arrive, I'm afraid I'll be too angry to sleep tonight. If I get sick again because I don't sleep well, you'll have to spend time with me in the hospital, won't you?" Grandfather Mo said and glared at her, making it clear that she had to stay here tonight. Otherwise, he would definitely lose his temper. He couldn't lose his temper because of his illness. He had to be in a good mood. If Jin Wan didn't see Grandfather Mo, she might be able to avoid him as ruthlessly as she did 3 years ago, but now Grandfather Mo was in front of her, and he still treated her as if she was his only granddaughter-in-law. Jin Wan really couldn't bear it. That night, Jin Wan stayed in the suite in the villa behind the Mo family, and Yen Gu was taken to a suitable room by Uncle O to rest. After entering the room, Jin Wan didn't go to take a shower as usual. Instead, she sat in front of the window, holding a cup of scented tea made by the servant in her hand and looking down. She didn't put down the cup until she saw Mo Joshua appear. Chapter 503. When she arrived at the door of the villa, Mo Joshua couldn't control the strange heat in her body at all. She walked in a trance. Just now, Mo Pylon insisted that she drink a bowl of white fungus lotus seed soup before going to bed, but after drinking it, she brought her another bowl, saying that she should change into a nightgown and bring it to Mo Jingshan in person. At first, Mo Joshua didn't understand, but when she felt the strange heat in her body, she roughly understood what she meant. Since she was a child, Mo Joshua did not have her own opinions and always listened to her mother. She had been like this since she was a child, but she had seen some novels and movies when she was in school. Now she guessed that Mo Pylon must have drugged her, and she also guessed that the bowl she was going to send to Mo Jingshan should also contain that drug. Although Mo Joshua didn't have the courage to feed this to Mo Jingshan, she couldn't refuse now, not to mention that she had a crush on Mo Jingshan since she was a child. After entering the villa, Mo Joshua carefully went upstairs with the bowl, came to Mo Jingshan's door, raised her hand, and gently knocked on the door. She knocked for a while, but no one answered. Mo Joshua continued to knock on the door. She remembered that her mother had told her not to say anything before opening the door. If he heard her voice, he might not even open the door. Therefore, she didn't say anything. However, the heat in her body made her feel uncomfortable all over. Her legs were so weak that she couldn't stand it anymore. She simply leaned against the door weakly and kept knocking on the door with her hand. The moment the door was finally opened, Mo Joshua hurriedly took a step back. Her face was flushed. She carefully raised the bowl in her hand and shyly looked at the expressionless man inside the door. In the villa, it was quiet for a long time, and no sound was heard. Jean Wan had suspected from the beginning that Mo Pylon had drugged her daughter and then asked Mo Joshua to put something in her daughter's supper. Then she sent her daughter there with her supper just like that? From their conversation, Jean Wan thought it was probably so. Just now, when she saw Mo Joshua's face, she also felt that she must have been drugged. In the middle of the night, Mo Jingshan should have guessed it. Based on his vigilance and his attitude toward the mother and daughter, if he didn't use some tricks, Mo Joshua might not even be able to knock on his door. But she sat in front of the window and watched for a long time, only to see Mo Pylon walking back and forth sneakily downstairs. Seeing that Mo Joshua hadn't come out after entering the villa for so long, Mo Pylon's face gradually became joyful. Jean Wan gradually felt a little strange. This shouldn't be the case. Could it be that even Mo Jingshan would fall for such a clumsy trick? She watched for a while longer and saw that Mo Pylon had already gone to the door of the villa. She seemed to be guarding the door on purpose, not wanting to be disturbed by other servants. Jean Wan paused for a moment, got up and was about to go out, but then she hesitated and picked up her cell phone to call Uncle O, but his cell phone was turned off. She guessed that he had gone to bed because it was too late. Jean Wan could only walk out quickly. As soon as she arrived at the door of the villa, she walked in without saying a word. What are you doing? Mo Pylon was guarding the door. Seeing that Jean Wan was going to force her way in, she quickly came over and gave Jean Wan a push. However, not only was Jean Wan not pushed away, but Mo Pylon was pushed back a few steps by Jean Wan's quick movement. She almost lost her balance and staggered before glaring at Jean Wan. Hiss, you're quite strong. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Jean Wan coldly raised her eyes and looked at her. I just came out of the villa across the street. Why? Can't I enter this villa? Of course not. You and Jingshan have divorced. This is Jingshan's place. Why did you go in so late at night? Really? The smile in Jean Wan's beautiful eyes was slightly cold, but Mo Pylon couldn't help shivering in the summer. Then who can enter? Your daughter. Jean Wan smiled, getting straight to the point. What are you talking about? My daughter? Joshua is sleeping soundly in the room. I suddenly have something to talk to Jingshan about. I don't know if he is resting now, so I stood here for a while. Jean Wan, I warn you, don't talk nonsense in the Mo family. You are no longer the granddaughter-in-law of the Mo family. No one can support you. Just stay here for one night and leave. Why are you everywhere? Aunt, since we're talking about the Mo family, you should know what you can and can't do. It's already good enough that you're able to stay in the Mo family just because the elder is soft-hearted. Right now, if you're bold enough to go against Mo Jingshan's gun, are you sure the two of you can bear the consequences? Jean Wan's smile was cold. Mo Pylon sneered and still refused to admit her mistake. I don't understand what you're talking about. After all, you are not a member of the Mo family now. The Mo family is not a place where you can go wherever you want. Anyway, you can't enter Jingshan's place. Go. With that, she stood in front of the door and raised her arm to block the door. Jean Wan coldly looked at her, glanced at the quiet villa, and raised her eyes to look upstairs. The lights were still on, but she could not see anyone. Mo Joshua had been in the room for so long. In fact, Jean Wan also hesitated. Was it necessary for her to meddle in this kind of business? What if Mo Jingshan was willing to fall into this trap? What if she went in to stop him now and interrupted him? Even though Jean Wan knew Mo Jingshan was not such a person, it seemed that she really had no reason to stop him. Mo Pailan seemed to notice Jean Wan's hesitation and immediately sneered. Jean Wan, take a look at yourself. The Mo family has nothing to do with you. It's just that the elder misses you. That's why he asked you to come over for a meal and stay for a night. Tomorrow, won't you still part ways with him? You are no longer a member of the Mo family. Just look at yourself and keep your place. Why are you meddling in other people's business? Seeing that Mo Pailan didn't want to leave, Jean Wan looked calm, but her heart was inexplicably agitated. She glanced down at the time. She calculated and found that Mo Joshua had been in the room for at least 20 minutes. If Mo Jingshan wanted to drive her away, he would have done so long ago. Why did he need her, an outsider, to come here? Thinking of this, Jean Wan frowned, didn't speak, and turned to leave. Chapter 504. Seeing where Jean Wan was looking, Mo Pailan hurriedly clenched the thing in her hand tighter and hid her hands behind her back. Jean Wan smiled and then her smile cooled down. She came up to her. Aunt, you're so thoughtful. You're afraid that he won't eat that bowl of food, so you asked Mo Joshua to rub this aphrodisiac on her body in advance? Mo Pailan's eyes panicked. What nonsense are you talking about? Jean Wan was young and had never had contact with people in the black market. How could she know about this thing? Jean Wan smiled. You probably don't know where this thing is made. When I was in London, my business competitor had a company that specialized in making these kinds of sex toys. These things are very popular abroad and can be seen in some drugstores near bars. You can only buy them in China through the black market. Do you think I haven't seen them? At the moment when Mo Pailan froze, Jean Wan suddenly turned around and walked in quickly. When Mo Pailan came back to herself and was about to reach out to stop her, Jean Wan had successfully crossed her line of defense and broke in smoothly. What are you doing? Come out. Seeing Jean Wan going upstairs quickly in a pair of indoor slippers, Mo Pailan hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Jean Wan's clothes, reached out to pull her back and stepped on the slippers under her feet. She couldn't let Jean Wan go up and ruin her daughter's plan. Jean Wan paused because of her feet and looked coldly at Mo Pailan's clenched teeth. She was in a hurry when she went downstairs just now, so she just put on a pair of slippers. She glanced at the smooth and shiny marble floor of the villa, including the stairs which were also made of smooth marble. She simply threw off the slippers on her feet, and at the same time, waved Mo Pailan's arm away, and quickly walked up again. Stop. Mo Pailan did not expect that although Jean Wan looked so thin, she was actually so strong and nimble. She was in her 50s, and she could barely stand still. She rushed up, panting. When Jean Wan had successfully reached the second floor, Mo Pailan suddenly made up her mind and grabbed Jean Wan's hair. When Jean Wan paused because of the pain, Mo Pailan took the opportunity to reach out her hands and choke her hard. Her eyes were red as she strangled her and glared at her. Don't you dare ruin my daughter's plan. I'm telling you. From today onwards, my daughter can't just follow my surname. I want her to truly become a member of the Mo family. Jean Wan, you can forget about having anything to do with Jing Shen in this lifetime. Strangled so hard and almost pushed down the stairs by her sudden brute force, Jean Wan hurriedly raised her hand to grab the handrail on the stairs to steady herself. Looking up at Mo Pailan's almost crazy expression, Jean Wan sneered and suddenly raised her other hand to grab Mo Pailan's wrist. Mo Pailan felt a sudden pain and numbness in her wrist. Before she could react, Jean Wan suddenly grabbed both of Mo Pailan's hands, and in the blink of an eye, Jean Wan turned the one who had been strangled into herself. Jean Wan looked deadpan at Mo Pailan, who was suddenly thrown away, put a little force on her wrist, and saw Mo Pylan's pale and incredulous expression in pain. You. Mo Pylan stared at her blankly, completely unable to understand how Jean Wan suddenly broke free from her and then restrained her. If it weren't for the title of an elder, I would have slapped you so hard that you wouldn't even remember your surname. As Jean Wan finished speaking, she suddenly loosened her hand, and Mo Pylan immediately staggered back and sat on the ground unprepared. Jean Wan turned and walked quickly toward Mo Jingshan's room. Seeing that Jean Wan had walked over, Mo Pylan struggled to sit up from the ground, stroked her waist that was almost broken from the fall, pounced on Jean Wan, and pressed her against the door. She raised her hand to cover Jean Wan's mouth so that she wouldn't disturb the people in the room. Jean Wan didn't expect that Mo Pylan would really use all kinds of dirty tricks in order to stay in the Mo family, nor did she expect that she could still be so strong at this time. Mo Pylan tugged at the clothes on Jean Wan's shoulders to drag her away. As the two were tearing at each other, the ring on Mo Pylan's finger left a red mark on Jean Wan's neck. This time, Jean Wan was in so much pain that she no longer cared about her aunt's face and slapped her hard. Mo Pylan was slapped so hard that she took a step back. The left side of her face hurt so much that she was stunned. Jean Wan's face was cold, and she said word by word coldly, "It's disgusting for someone so old to be so shameless." You. Jean Wan leaned against the door. The pain on her neck made her frown unhappily. She raised her hand and rubbed her neck. Sure enough, there was blood. Even if you're stupid, there should be a limit. Do you think you can survive in the Mo family after tonight? Mo Pylan's eyes were red. She put down the hand covering her face and rushed up to strangle Jean Wan's neck again, as if she wouldn't stop until she strangled Jean Wan to death. As soon as she rushed over, Jean Wan was thrown against the door. All of a sudden, the door behind Jean Wan was opened without warning. She instantly lost her balance and fell backward. The man in the door caught her just in time, and she fell into a familiar embrace. Jean Wan stiffened. She raised her eyes to see the man whose eyes were clear and not affected by the drug at all. At the same time, he was neatly dressed and handsome. Before she could react, the man's arm circled around her waist and brought her into his arms. Seeing the door open, Mo Pylan's red eyes froze. She stared blankly at Mo Jingshan, who didn't show any signs of intimacy and even acted as if nothing had happened. You. Jingshan. Mo Pylan's eyes immediately panicked. She wanted to look into the room to see where Mo Jiashue was. Jean Wan also looked at Mo Jingshan, and the tense string in her mind immediately loosened. She asked with a straight face, "Are you all right?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the obvious red mark on her neck, which was still seeping with a faint trace of blood. He coldly narrowed his eyes, hiding all his emotions. He held her in his arms without letting go, asking softly, "How did you get hurt?" Only then did Jean Wan remember the wound on her neck. At the same time, she returned to herself and rushed to struggle out of his arms. However, the man's arm was firmly circled around her waist. Chapter 505. As Mo Jingshan lowered his head to look at the wound on Jean Wan's neck, he glanced at her feet that were stepping on the cold floor. His voice was light with some displeasure. "You're not wearing shoes? Are you complaining that your body is not cold enough?" Jean Wan lowered her eyes to look at her own feet. Under the man's gaze, her toes could not help but curl up. It was not that she was not wearing slippers. It was just that it was inconvenient for her to walk in them after being stepped on by Mo Pylan, so she decided to take them off at the stairs. Then she heard the man's cold voice with a hint of a smile. "There is a fire escape on the second floor of the villa that leads to the back door. I only told Mo Jiashue one sentence. If she dares to take a single step into my room tonight, I'm afraid there will no longer be a place for the two of you in this huge Haicheng." His words were directed at Mo Pylan. Jean Wan immediately raised her eyes to look at Mo Pylan, whose face had instantly paled. "You." Mo Pylan's eyes were flustered. There was indeed more than one door in this villa. Earlier, she was guarding the front door, thinking that it would be fine as long as she did not allow anyone to enter and disturb them. However, she neglected to consider whether Mo Joshua would escape from the back. Although your daughter doesn't have her own opinions, she understands the stakes better than you. Compared to bringing that bowl of soup through my door and incurring my disgust, at least she knows when to advance and when to retreat. Mo Jingshan's voice was extremely light. Mo Pylan's gaze met his cold, thin smile. She wanted to say something but paused. No, she had to find Joshua and clarify things. Before she left, she suddenly glanced at Jean Wan with a cold and mocking smile. Aren't you guys already divorced? After finishing her words, under Jean Wan's even stiffer expression, she rushed to the back door. She pushed open the back door and saw that the bowl of white fungus soup had indeed been smashed on the ground. She immediately trembled in anger. This damn brat. However, the moment Mo Pylan left, she rushed to struggle out of Mo Jingshan's embrace. The man only lowered his eyes to glance at her expression. Without speaking, he directly carried her into the door, and slammed it shut with a bang. The moment she was abruptly carried into the room, the familiar surroundings caused Jean Wan's hair to stand on end. This was not Mo Jingshan's room alone. 3 years ago, when they were still lovey-dovey, this was the room they had stayed in together. The past was still vivid in her mind. She pushed him hard with both hands, but the man directly carried her onto the bed. The moment her body touched the bed, she immediately jumped up. Don't move. Mo Jingshan glanced at the wound on her neck. As he picked up his phone, he asked coldly, was it scratched by your nails? Jean Wan did not answer. She raised her hand to touch the place on her neck that was still faintly aching. However, before she could touch it, the man abruptly grabbed her wrist. She didn't know who had called, but he said, Mo at Shen, G Nguyen at G. Jean Wan was about to shake his hand off when she heard the man speak into the phone, send the first aid kit over. After finishing his words, he tossed the phone aside and glanced at Jean Wan's toes, which were curled up by the bed due to her tense emotions. He watched her for a while with a deep gaze. Seeing that she was still coldly avoiding his gaze, he couldn't help but chuckle. Hearing the man's chuckle, Jean Wan abruptly raised her eyes to glare at him. What are you laughing at? You didn't sleep this late and ran here barefoot. You're worried about me, N? Jean Wan's expression turned colder. Don't think too highly of yourself. I just happened to overhear their conversation and knew that they were up to no good. This is the Mo family home. If something filthy and disgusting really happened, Grandfather Mo will most likely be so angry that his illness will act up tomorrow. I can only blame myself for being stupid to care about such things. Really? The man still chuckled. Jean Wan didn't want to disturb him, but when she saw the small silver bag in Mo Pylan's hand, she felt that she had gone too far, so she rushed up to her. Now she regretted it very much, but even if she said those words, she was afraid that it would only make things worse. She was very vexed. She regretted that she had been so impulsive just now. After 3 years, had she forgotten what kind of person Mo Jingshan was? How could he be so easily tricked by her? However, what Uncle O told her kept reminding her of the scene where Elder Mo broke his crutch on his back, which made her unable to lie down and rest peacefully. In short, she was really impulsive tonight. Jean Wan was depressed. The servant came quickly. In less than 3 or 4 minutes, the spare first aid kit of the Mo family was sent over. Mo Jingshan opened the door to pick up the first aid kit. Every time Jean Wan was about to get out of bed, the man would throw 2 threatening words at her. Don't move. At this moment, he was taking medicine from the first aid kit. His eyes were calm and steady, and his expression was calm and indifferent, making it difficult to see through him. When he brought the medicine over, when Jean Wan looked at him with a guarded face, he motioned for her to raise her chin. Jean Wan looked at the closed door and hesitated before slowly raising her head. As soon as the disinfectant was rubbed on her neck, she trembled in pain but didn't make a sound. She even turned her face away and closed her eyes to avoid looking at the man who was applying medicine for her. Mo Jingshan glanced at her forbearing expression and didn't speak. His movements became lighter. When he applied medicine on her neck, he found that the wound might not be caused by fingernails. Thinking of the diamond rings that Mo Pylon liked to wear on her hand, he knew the cause of the wound. If you hadn't hurt yourself, I might have appreciated your bravery tonight. Unfortunately, you are still brave and can't even protect yourself, the man commented sarcastically. Jean Wan, she was still upset that she shouldn't have come here tonight. At this moment, she was angry, but she didn't show it. Hearing this, she was about to push him away and stand up, when the man suddenly touched her ear. The vague pain and inexplicable sensitivity made her give a short, low cry. Just now, when Mo Pylon pulled her hair, her nails had touched her ear. Although it didn't hurt, it must have been broken. What's your name? The man helped her apply medicine on the broken skin on her ear and said lightly in an emotionless tone, "When I opened the door for Mo Joshua, I smelled the smell you applied on her body. If you dare to call me that again, I'll see if I can bear it." Jean Wan. Chapter 506. The moment she fell on the bed, Jean Wan rushed to sit up. Mo Jingshan didn't do anything to her. He just put away the medicine in his hand. His shirt was still neatly on, indicating that he hadn't showered or slept so early. His temperament was cold and handsome, but she couldn't sense any lust from him. She had always known this man's calmness and self-control. Mo Shaoza had once used this method to make things happen between him and Nshuyan. At that time, he didn't seem to be shaken by lust, so the fragrance shouldn't be a problem. Putting the medicine box aside, Mo Jingshan seemed to finally find the time to look down at the woman sitting by the bed. As soon as their eyes met, Jean Wan's nerves tightened, but she still stood up. "It's just a small wound. There's no need to do this. The medicine has been applied. I'm going back." He glanced at her barefoot on the ground, and his handsome face was unruffled. He said mildly, "Put on your shoes. The shoes are outside." Mo Jingshan signaled her to go to the temporary shoe rack in the room with his eyes. Jean Wan hesitated and walked over. She opened the door on the inside of the shoe rack and suddenly saw the pink slippers that she had only worn 2 or 3 times when she came to the Mo family. She paused. Looking at the pair of shoes inside, it seemed that nothing had changed in the past 3 years. She opened her mouth. "Mo Jingshan, I really want to know. Back then, you didn't want me anymore. Did you regret it later?" She didn't know when, but the man had come behind her. He unhurriedly took out the pair of pink slippers and handed them to her. "What do you think?" Hearing these words, Jean Wan took the shoes and said mildly, "Maybe not, because I've never seen the word regret on you." The man glanced at the shoes on her feet. "Put them on. It's getting late. Go to sleep." His voice was gentle, as if the two of them were just chatting about a common, everyday topic. Jean Wan composed herself and turned to look at him. "When grandfather Mo beat you, why did you? There's still some drug in my body. Are you sure you can withstand my loss of control? Continue to stand here, but I can't guarantee how long I can endure it." The man interrupted her. His tone remained the same, but his voice was deep and hoarse. Jean Wan's voice faltered. She abruptly opened the door and quickly walked out, not staying a moment longer. As the night grew darker, Jean Wan tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When she finally fell asleep, she suddenly received a call before 4 in the morning. When she saw that the caller ID was Yen Ji's number, she frowned. Why was this brat calling at this time? Jean Wan picked up the phone and put it to her ear, still lying on the bed, and answered the phone with her eyes closed. "What? Calling me at this hour? Are you sleepwalking?" "Sister Wan, I'm sorry to wake you up so late, but our SWAT team suddenly has an urgent mission and has recalled all our members. The Mo family is too far from the city, and we can't hail a taxi at this hour, so we might have to drive your car back. Yen Ji's voice was unusually stern. It sounded like he really had an urgent mission. Yen Gu did not have as much freedom as Feng Ling. After all, he belonged to the SWAT team. Even though he was by her side as a bodyguard, he still had to listen to his superior's orders. If there was any major case or mission that required manpower, he had to rush back at any time. All right, then come to the villa I live in. I'll open the window and throw the car key down for you. All right. Sorry to trouble you, Sister Nguyen. Jean Wan sat up and took out the car key from her bag. After waiting for a while, Yen Gu was already waiting downstairs. She pushed open the window and glanced at him. Usually, Yen Gu would laugh and laugh like a sunny boy by her side. She did not expect that when there was a mission in the team, his expression would be so stern. Jean Wan threw the key down. He raised his hand to express his gratitude. Jean Wan only waved her hand to ask him to hurry up and then turned back to bed to continue sleeping. It was not until 7:00 the next morning when Jean Wan woke up that she suddenly remembered that the car had been driven away by Yen Gu. How was she going to return? As expected, Jean Wan had to rush back to MN Group for work. Mo Jingshan was also preparing to return to the company because Elder Mo had been recovering well for the past 2 days. With Elder Mo around, Jean Wan had no choice but to take Mo Jingshan's car. The black ghost drove out of the Mo family home. Elder Mo kept smiling and waving from behind, telling Jean Wan to come back often to visit him. It was not until the car window was closed that Jean Wan restrained the smile on her face. She stared at the front of the car and did not look at the man who was driving. The atmosphere in the car was very quiet. However, during breakfast, Jean Wan could tell that the drug in Mo Jingshan's body was already gone. Right now, in the car, she could clearly feel the man's clear and faint scent. The car had just driven into High City's downtown area when they suddenly heard the sound of several police cars clamoring. Many of the surrounding cars were forced to stop, and many of the cars parked by the side of the road had been knocked askew. There seemed to be the smell of exhaust smoke in the air, as well as some kind of gunpowder smoke. When the car drove into this area, it saw the scattered police cars and armed police officers in the surroundings. Mo Jingshan slowed down the car and looked in that direction. It appeared that a fierce police chase had just happened here. There were several pools of blood on the ground. Jean Wan also saw it. If it were in the past, seeing the blood on the ground and the armed police officers would definitely shock her. However, after experiencing life and death in Cambodia, she was no longer surprised by such things. She was only puzzled. Strictly speaking, last night, the SWAT team was on an urgent mission. Could it be this? Mo Jingshan had already driven the car to the nearest police car. The police stationed here would ask every passing car to stop and search. When he rolled down the car window, the police took a look at them and then at the situation in the car. As usual, he recorded the license plate number of the security car on the booklet in his hand and said, "If you want to go downtown, you'd better take a detour. The police are chasing a group of armed kidnappers. To ensure the safety of the nearby citizens, the roads ahead have been sealed off. Can't we directly go to the West City district from here?" Jean Wan asked. Chapter 507. Usually, such shootings were more common overseas. Within the country, there were not many cases of armed kidnappers. With such a sudden occurrence, it was no wonder the entire SWAT team had been mobilized. Even Yen Gu had been summoned back. Seeing so many police cars and destroyed cars around them, it was likely that there had been an intense car chase before they arrived. Many car glass shards were scattered on the ground, as well as the bloodstains on the ground. All of this indicated the kidnappers' ruthlessness and speed when they fled without a care for anything. "Thanks." Jean Wan nodded at the police officer. The officer raised his hand and waved it forward, indicating that the car could be let through. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan. It seems like I'll have to trouble CEOMO to take a detour around the city to send me. This originally 1-hour trip will probably take a long time. Mo Jingshan did not respond. A moment later, he only said, "Fasten your seatbelt." Jean Wan lowered her head to check her seatbelt. "It's fastened." The man glanced at the surrounding police cars and debris on the ground. With a roar, the black ghost sped toward the city's highway. It was already morning, and the sky was bright. There were 2 entrances to the highway nearby, and several police cars were stationed around them. It seemed like the entire city was under martial law. She wondered what the situation in the city was like right now. Both sides of the highway were lush green fields in summer. Jean Wan had lived in High City for a long time, but she rarely passed by this highway. In order to try her best to ignore the man driving, she picked up her cell phone and took a few photos of the fields. The air conditioner in the car was moderately warm, but outside the car, it was scorching hot at -35 degrees. Every few kilometers, she could see police cars by the roadside. However, she did not see which car Yen Gu was in. She guessed that he was somewhere else. Finally, when they were about to exit the highway, a slightly worn-out van suddenly appeared from another intersection. Jean Wan glanced at the front through the rearview mirror, only to see that the van was suddenly speeding in their direction. In fact, it was even charging in the opposite direction. When she saw that there seemed to be a black muzzle pointing at their car window, her expression froze. She immediately tightened her grip on her phone. No wonder the police officers standing outside the police cars on the ring highway were so tense. It turned out that this group of people had already escaped from the west side of the city. God knows how many cars they had changed. This van was definitely a cover for them to hijack halfway through their journey. Jean Wan stared at the black muzzle and suddenly had a question in her mind. Mo Jingshan's car had been driven in the country. Were the windows bulletproof? If they really opened fire, would the bullets be able to penetrate? But he also felt that his idea was ridiculous. Bulletproof glass was not something that could be used casually. It might be common abroad, but it was not necessarily the case in China. For the sake of fire safety and other aspects of safety, some domestic vehicle control centers generally did not allow bulletproof glass to be used casually. Sit properly. All of a sudden, the man's calm and cold voice entered her ears. Jean Wan subconsciously steadied her body. Sit properly. The moment she finished speaking, she suddenly felt the van and the car collide with each other at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, the car brushed against the gun raised against the window. The ear-piercing sound of the car door rubbing against each other caused all the hair on one's body to stand on end. However, in this kind of hair-raising moment, Jean Wan was not the slightest bit afraid. The sun was glaring on the horizon. The man's expression was as usual. In the face of life and death, in the face of danger, or in the face of any unstoppable force, his gaze remained cold and heavy. He did not say a single word. When the rear window of the van was also opened and a gun was aimed at their car, there was a peng sound. At the same time, the car Jean Wan was sitting in also quickly avoided the bullet attack. The van seemed to have set its sights on them. Hearing the sound of the police car chasing from behind, the van sped up on the highway, heading straight for them. However, just as Mo Jingshan finally drove the car to another highway exit, the van that had been rushing toward them quickly caught up. The 2 men leaned half of their bodies out of the car window, raised their guns, and fired 2 shots at their car tires. The moment the 2 gunshots rang out, Jean Wan instantly felt the car falling down. The tires had burst. The moment the tire burst, the car, which had been driving steadily, tilted to the other side of the road due to its center of gravity. Thankfully, Mo Jingshan's driving skills were adept, and he easily stabilized the car. However, after the tire burst, the car's speed decreased significantly. The minivan that was originally close to them immediately rushed over and blocked in front of their car. This was a downhill road off the highway. In front of them was the van, and behind them was a slope. It was not a problem for the car to continue driving forward, but because the rear tires had burst, they could not move back. Seeing the two men in black in the van coming toward their car with guns, Jean-Wan's heart finally jumped up. Their guns have been modified. They can easily shoot through ordinary car windows. Mo Jingshan looked at the two men who came over with guns and surrounded them, speaking unhurriedly. Jean-Wan asked in surprise, "Then can we still rush out now?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the crowded vegetable market in front of the van. People living near the Ring Highway like to buy things in this kind of outdoor vegetable market. The sky was clear and there were many people. If they rushed out now, there would be dozens or even hundreds of casualties, including many children who came out with their families. "Lie down. Don't make a sound." Mo Jingshan unfastened Jean-Wan's seatbelt and warned her with a heavy voice. As soon as he finished speaking, Jean-Wan's head was suddenly pressed down by him. He didn't withdraw his hand until he could no longer point the gun at her from the angle of the car window. Jean-Wan knew that there were countless innocent passers-by in front of them and police cars approaching from behind. The two of them were unarmed except for this car. The only thing they could do was to stall for time and protect themselves. She obediently hid under the car door and did not speak, but her eyes were on Mo Jingshan. Chapter 508. Mo Jingshan had completely predicted their plan. There was no need for the car to be locked. The kidnapper outside had already fired 2 shots at the center of the car's lock. Even if it was locked, it would still be opened. Hearing the gunshots from the door, Jean-Wan subconsciously stood up. The car door that normal bullets would not be able to penetrate was already smoking. At this moment, Mo Jingshan glanced at her, using his eyes to warn her not to move. They had guns, but she and he did not. In such a situation, they could either stall for time or be killed on the spot. Just as Jean-Wan was wondering what Mo Jingshan was planning, she heard him say in a low and cold voice, "These two people's arms and legs are injured. They won't be able to drive for long. They need someone to drive and help them escape. This is a chance. Listen to me and don't move." Before Jean-Wan could react, the front and back car doors were abruptly opened. One of the kidnappers jumped into the car, raising his gun and pressing it against Mo Jingshan's head. The other kidnapper also pointed his gun at him. "If you want to live, drive the car and find a way out." As expected, it was exactly as Mo Jingshan had said. The moment she saw the cold muzzle of the gun pointed at Mo Jingshan's head, the same fear she felt 3 years ago in Cambodia surged into her heart. Jean-Wan raised her hand to cover her mouth, trying her best not to make a sound. However, the car was only so big. She was a living person squatting in the front passenger seat. Naturally, they would see her immediately. The two kidnappers coldly glanced at her and continued to press the gun harshly against Mo Jingshan's head. Mo Jingshan's features were cold and indifferent. Without any other expression, he raised his hands to indicate his agreement. The two kidnappers saw that he did not resist and thought that he was afraid. As the sirens of the police cars approached, they exchanged glances and jumped into the car, closing the doors. One of them continued to point the gun at the back of Mo Jingshan's head, while the other pointed the gun at Jean-Wan. Jean-Wan stared at the gun. She turned to see Mo Jingshan mouthing 3 words to her, "Don't move." The kidnappers had been chased by the entire city police force for who knew how long. They were injured and reeked of blood. They could kill the two of them at any time in a fit of anger and then drive away. Even if they couldn't drive far due to their injuries, it was still better than leaving their fate in the hands of a stranger. Right now, Mo Jingshan was gambling. He was gambling on their trust. He was gambling on their unfamiliarity with high cities' terrain. They had to find someone to drive them away. Jean-Wan also knew that these kidnappers were not joking around. She only stared at the black muzzle that was pointed at her. She heard them urging them to drive faster and saw them pull the trigger. If they continued to delay, before the police arrived, the two of them would definitely be shot to death. Mo expressionlessly started the engine and drove. The two kidnappers said from behind, "The speed of this car is very fast." Fortunately, only the two tires at the back burst. It should only affect the speed a little. If we keep driving fast, we should be able to shake off the police cars behind us. As he spoke, the kidnapper who had the gun pressed against Mo Jingshan's head suddenly said coldly, "Hurry up and drive. Don't dilly-dally." At the same time, he pressed the barrel of the gun harshly against Mo Jingshan's shoulder as a threat. Such a familiar scene caused Jin Wan's hands and feet to turn cold. She abruptly raised her eyes to say, "Don't you have to use your arms and shoulders to control the steering wheel while driving? If you press down on him like this, how is he going to drive?" The two men immediately focused their attention on Jin Wan, who appeared to be completely powerless. "Yo, this little girl is quite hot." Mo Jingshan did not even furrow his brows when the gun was pressed against him. However, because Jin Wan had attracted their attention, his gaze turned cold. He immediately gave her a warning look. "Hurry up and drive." The kidnappers heard the sound of a police car approaching. They felt that although the car's speed was fast, it deliberately avoided the vegetable market after exiting the highway. Instead, it turned into a small road by the side. This small road was not smooth and was filled with potholes. The bumpy road caused them to be extremely frustrated. "If the police car really catches up to us, I'll first kill your woman with a gun before killing you." The gun once again landed on his shoulder. This time, it was smashed down. After the car gradually stabilized, Mo Jingshan said hoarsely, "Drive past a road and let her off. I'll bring you guys away." Jin Wan abruptly turned to look at him. There was a short moment of silence in the car. However, the two kidnappers did not hesitate over whether they should let her go. Instead, one of them suddenly said, "Should we kill him first? I think this woman should know how to drive." "Let her drive?" They saw that although the man driving was skilled, it was clear that he was just stalling for time. If this person was not honest, they might really be captured by the police. The cold barrel of the gun was pressed against Mo Jingshan's head. The kidnappers were about to move when Jin Wan suddenly shouted, "I don't know how to drive. Even if you kill him, I won't drive." The kidnapper's movements paused. He immediately stared at her suspiciously. Jin Wan found a sharp spot under the front passenger seat and slashed it harshly twice. She then raised her hand that was covered in red marks and was even leaking blood to show them. She then raised the wound on her neck to show them. "This is my car. The person driving is the chauffeur I hired. I went out to participate in an outdoor activity and accidentally suffered some external injuries. I was just about to ask the chauffeur to send me to the hospital to bandage them up. If I knew how to drive, why would I need to hire a chauffeur?" The kidnapper coldly laughed. He suddenly pressed the barrel of the gun against her head. "Chauffeur? Whose chauffeur is dressed so luxuriously? Are you trying to trick a 3-year-old? No matter what, I'm a famous businessman in Haicheng. My chauffeur follows me to all sorts of places. Of course, I have to dress more decently. From top to bottom, I can't even see the brand of his clothes. Haven't you heard of high-quality imitations? With just a few hundred yuan, he can buy a shirt and trousers that look exactly the same as the original. I even gave him this pair of leather shoes when I was in a good mood. What's wrong with that?" The kidnapper coldly laughed. At the same time as he pulled the trigger, he felt the atmosphere and temperature in the car suddenly plummet. The kidnapper turned to look at the expressionless man who was calmly driving the car. "Chauffeur? Your chauffeur's adaptability is really extraordinary. He even knows how to avoid our car. Earlier, when he bumped into our car on the highway, I don't think he's an ordinary chauffeur." As he spoke, the gun that was originally aimed at Jin Wan suddenly turned toward Mo Jingshan. The two of them seemed to really want to kill Mo Jingshan and leave her, a woman, to drive. Chapter 509. As the car shook violently, the two kidnappers who were already injured fell to the side with their guns raised. One of the kidnappers whose arm was heavily injured also dropped his gun by the side. The sirens of the police cars grew closer. The other kidnapper had also fallen to the other side due to the abnormally violent shaking of the car. Before he could return to his senses, he was sprawled against the back of the seat. The gun in his hand was swiftly pressed against Immerse's head, and he scolded with a fierce expression, "Damn, this car sure has some skill. If you want to live, shake off the police car for me. Otherwise, this old man will shoot you right now." Seeing that the other gun was still on the ground, Jean Wan's hand slowly moved on the seat. She removed her high heels and ignored the warning gaze Immerse was giving her. She abruptly stood up and rushed up. As she stood up, she viciously slammed the sharp heel against the kidnapper's arm and the high heel in her other hand viciously slammed against his face. Jean Wan's eyes were filled with shock. Immerse's gaze turned cold. The moment the other kidnapper stood up and was about to move against Jean Wan, he made a quick turn, causing the kidnapper's body to tilt uncontrollably to the right. Jean Wan quickly reached out to pick up the gun on the ground. However, the moment she raised her head, the kidnapper whom she had just injured in the face and arm had already pressed the gun against her head. The cold barrel of the gun was pressed against her head. He narrowed his eyes at Immerse, who was in the driver's seat. "Don't move. If you dare move, I'll kill her immediately. Drive the car onto the main road for me. Don't waste time on the small road." Jean Wan's arm was harshly held by the kidnapper, and the gun was pressed against her forehead. This modified gun was not much weaker than the long guns she had encountered in Cambodia. In fact, it was even faster. With just a slight movement of his finger, a bloody hole would instantly appear on her head. The gun in her hand had yet to be grasped tightly when it was snatched away by the other kidnapper. At the same time, she felt a sharp pain on the back of her neck. The other party had used the butt of the gun to slam it against her head. The pain caused her to stumble and fall into the back seat. As Immerse's cold gaze swept over from the rearview mirror, the kidnappers continued to press their guns against Jean Wan. They clearly realized that pointing their guns at this woman was more effective than pointing at him. At the very least, the speed of the car had increased. Jean Wan was just about to struggle when the kidnapper used the butt of the gun to smash down harshly on the back of her neck, causing her to feel nauseous and her vision to blur. Just like that, she was pressed firmly against the car seat. Her hands were locked behind her back, and she barely managed to turn her head around. However, the kidnapper held her hostage and ordered Immerse to drive the car onto a clear road. The sirens of the police cars kept approaching. The domestic armed police force was not a joke. The reason why these two kidnappers wanted to hijack their car was that they fancied the performance of this ghost was too good. Its speed was also not a luxury car that ordinary cars could catch up with. If they hadn't driven the van to crash head-on just now, they probably wouldn't have been able to catch up with it. "Drive faster. Hurry up. Damn it, if you can't increase the distance between us and the police car in 30 seconds, the two of you can forget about living." The gun in the kidnapper's hand pressed down once more. With a click, it was pressed against Jean Wan's ear. Jean Wan was pressed tightly against the seat, and her entire body was tense. She endured the pain to say, "You guys shot the rear tires. How fast can this car go? Shut up." The kidnapper grabbed her hair harshly. Jean Wan's upper body was pressed against the seat, and her legs were almost kneeling. The two kidnappers did not sit down. One of them helped to press her down while paying attention to the police car behind them. There was not the slightest hint of relaxation on his face. He raised his leg and directly stepped on Jean Wan's back, using this opportunity to maintain his balance in the car. The kidnapper suddenly said, "The driver, open the rear window." In the next second, the car window was opened. The kidnapper, whose face was covered in blood from Jean Wan's heel earlier, turned around and raised his gun toward the police car, chasing them relentlessly. With a pang sound, he fired a shot. The bullet didn't hit the tire of the police car, but at least it could be seen that the police knew that they had hijacked the car and knew that there were people in the car that they had hijacked, so they couldn't shoot them. He immediately sneered and said, "Drive to the road with fewer cars, and drive as fast as you can." Ever since Jin Wan was pressed against the back seat by the two of them, Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold. He did not speak, nor did he quickly turn the car around. He was afraid that the two of them would attack her again in a fit of anger. In a situation where they did not have any weapons, they were all made of flesh and blood. At this moment, anyone under the muzzle of a gun was akin to meat on a chopping board. The man did not bat an eyelid as he increased the speed of the car. The distance between them and the police car grew. Jin Wan was pressed down hard, and her back was stepped on harshly by the kidnapper. Both her hands were locked behind her. She lay there with some difficulty, breathing. However, her gaze occasionally shifted toward Mo Jingshan's seemingly calm back as he drove. After not seeing him for 3 years, she discovered that this man's ability to remain unfazed in the face of danger had always been extraordinary. In fact, it was even better than 3 years ago. However, when the kidnappers heard that there were police surrounding them, they anxiously and angrily kicked Jin Wan's back twice. Jin Wan instantly felt her chest tremble violently, and the taste of blood almost rose from her throat. She resisted the pain and did not make a sound. From the corner of her eyes, she saw that the man's fingers were gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles had turned pale. Jin Wan's lips suddenly curved, releasing a low, hoarse laugh. After ruthlessly shattering all of her happiness, would she still care about the slightest bit of heartache and warmth? She admitted that when she suddenly got up and rushed over just now, she just didn't want them to shoot him. In this situation, it was difficult to protect herself. She knew that if she hadn't been in this car just now, it would have been easy for Mo Jingshan to escape, but she was in this car, and she was his burden, so she almost rushed up with the intention of risking her life. No matter what, at least for the sake of the Mo Jingshan who had always protected her behind, at least for the sake of the Mo Jingshan who had held her to avoid bullets in Cambodia, she would do this without hesitation. 3 years ago, the person who died was not only Mo Jingshan, but also herself. A person lived for a lifetime. Furthermore, she had one more life. If she wanted to die, she would die. If she wanted to live, she would live. Why did she have to endure it so miserably? However, this man still threw away his armor to protect her. Chapter 5:10. Through the rearview mirror, their gazes met. Jin Wan smiled at him, and a single tear fell from the corner of her eye, flowing down the side of her nose. The smile on her lips did not change. Mo Jingshan watched her, and his gaze deepened inch by inch. At this moment, the kidnapper noticed that their eyes met. He thought that the two of them had a tacit understanding to resist and immediately smashed the butt of the gun against Jin Wan's head. As she groaned in pain, he abruptly tugged at her hair and gave her a harsh slap, scolding, "Turn your head away." Jin Wan's face was filled with rage. The kidnapper's face was filled with rage as he cursed, "Turn your head away." Jin Wan's head was instantly pressed to the side. Her body was almost twisted from the pressure, and she gritted her teeth in pain. Her body trembled. Mo Jingshan watched as blood slowly flowed from Jin Wan's head to the back of her neck, dyeing her clothes red. At this moment, his gaze turned even colder. He drove the car to 180 kilometers per hour, speeding toward the deserted Binhai Road. The kidnapper's face was injured by Jin Wan earlier, and half of his face was covered in blood. When he saw that the woman was struggling to resist, he immediately revealed a bloodthirsty smile. "Little girl, he's not a driver at all. The two of you are a couple, aren't you?" Jin Wan's head was pressed against the back of the seat. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, hoarsely saying, "No." "Still so stubborn? Earlier on, in order to save this man, you didn't even care about your own life. It's clear that you want to fight us to the death. However, if you want to fight us to the death with those thin arms and legs of yours, this old man won't even need a gun. I can press you down with my bare hands." As he spoke, the kidnapper fiercely tugged at her hair again. Seeing that half of Jean Wan's face was swollen from the earlier blow, he directly pressed the muzzle of the gun against her face. His gaze was roguish and filled with viciousness as he said, "Tell me, when I open fire, should I first shoot through your head? Or should I just shoot you in the face with your delicate skin and tender flesh? Shoot on both sides of your face, leaving a bloody hole on each side. It must look good, right?" There was a faint scent of blood in the car. He wasn't sure if it was the kidnapper's blood or the blood from Jean Wan's head that had been smashed by the gun, but Jean Wan closed her eyes and said calmly and depressingly, "Didn't I drive you to escape?" The car kept speeding up. "Why are you in such a rush to kill me? If you really kill me, I'm afraid that both of you will die today." The kidnapper, however, laughed loudly. He tugged at her hair and forced her head to tilt back. "Baby, such a fierce character doesn't match your enchanting and sexy little figure at all. If you had begged for mercy, perhaps we could have given you a quick death on account of your soft and tender skin. One shot and it'll be over. You won't even feel any pain before you go straight to hell. What a pity, your character makes this old man want to bully you for a while longer." As he spoke, the kidnapper purposely moved his hand down her hair. When he touched Jean Wan's waist, he narrowed his eyes and moved the gun that was originally pressed against her face down, pressing against her chest. He touched her waist with one hand and used the gun to draw circles on her chest with the other. Sensing that she was trembling from anger, he smiled and said, "If it wasn't for the fact that we're in a rush to escape, this old man would definitely press you down in this car and teach you a good lesson." The meaning behind his words was extremely clear. At this moment, Mo Jingshan continued to increase the speed of the car while speaking in a heavy tone, "If you want to escape, don't touch her." The kidnapper coldly laughed as he pressed Jean Wan down firmly. The gun was once again pressed against her temple, and he unhurriedly stepped on her back. He laughed and whistled, turning to look at Mo Jingshan. "All right, if you drive the car above 220, I won't touch her. If you're any slower, I'll rip apart her clothes. Give her a good kiss. Even if you end up dying with us, this old man can be considered to have died under a peony flower. Even if I die, I'll die happily." The car indeed increased in speed. The man driving was unusually calm. However, right now, their lives were in his hands. They were only threatening each other. They had guns, while he had a car. They could kill, and he could bring them away. Jean Wan knew that at a time like this, her half-baked skills were completely useless. She heard the kidnapper's proud whistle and felt the two kidnappers' gazes moving down her back bit by bit, as though they were sizing up her figure. Their gazes paused on her waist, and they used their hands to touch it with ill intentions. In an instant, goosebumps rose all over her body. All of a sudden, Mo Jingshan drove the car onto a large road. The two kidnappers noticed that the speed of the car had indeed reached 220 kilometers per hour, or even faster. They glanced back at the police cars that were almost out of sight, and then at the sea not far from the car window. They narrowed their eyes and asked, "Where is this?" "Binhai Road," Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. Hearing the words Binhai Road, Jean Wan directly laid there unmoving, no longer resisting. A familiar scene flashed past her eyes. She remembered this place. Such a wide road, it's obvious that it's newly built. The surroundings aren't bad either. Why isn't there a single car? The kidnappers suspected that there was a trap. They pointed their guns at Jean Wan as they asked sternly. This road was completed several years ago. However, because there are a few sections between this road and the expressway that haven't been demolished, it's impassable. From here to the city, we have to take a detour of 10 kilometers before we can enter. Gradually, no one is willing to take a detour on this road. Mo Jingshan's voice was calm, but there was a hint of coldness in it. Listening to his patient explanation, it was likely that he had no choice but to be so obedient because his woman was being held hostage by them. The two kidnappers immediately smiled proudly. When they looked back, they could no longer see the police cars. For a moment, they forgot about the important word detour that Immerse had mentioned. They did not expect that there would be an even closer entrance on this road to intercept them. However, they still pressed down harshly on Jinwan. They were certain that as long as this woman was in their hands, this man would be obedient until they sent them to a safe place. The morning sun hung from the east. Under the piercing light, the straight Binhai road quietly extended into the distance. The quiet sea had only light waves crashing against it. In this tranquility, a black ghost sped forward at an astonishing speed. Seeing that Jinwan was quietly lying there, the two kidnappers thought that she had fainted. They lowered their heads to examine her. Seeing that her eyes were closed and unmoving, they directly reached out and slapped her head harshly. Jinwan's eyes remained closed and unmoving. Fainted? The kidnappers muttered. Could it be an act? She was awake earlier. Chapter 5:11. The kidnapper instantly tore off the clothes on her shoulders. The thin summer dress produced a crisp tearing sound. In an instant, Jinwan's entire back was exposed, leaving only the pathetically thin buttons of her underwear sticking to her back. Jinwan remained motionless. You've really fainted? The kidnapper stared at the tender skin hidden under her clothes and was about to reach out with his blood-stained hand to touch it. At this moment, the black ghost took advantage of the moment when the two of them were distracted by the police cars and abruptly charged toward the safety barrier by the roadside. The moment the car broke through the safety barrier, Jinwan, who had not moved for a long time, suddenly opened her eyes. Before the two kidnappers could react, she raised her hand and viciously grabbed the hair of the two kidnappers, slamming their heads together harshly. Ah! Motherf ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** The moment the two kidnappers raised their guns and were about to point at Jin-won, he directly drove the car toward the sea. In that moment of life and death, the car had already entered the water. The sudden weightlessness and shaking caused the hands of the two kidnappers to tremble. Mo Jingshan's eyes and hands were sharp. Taking advantage of the moment the two of them released their restraints on Jin-won, he turned around and slammed his hand against the back of one of the kidnappers' neck. His elbow slammed heavily against the other's face. The moment the other person stumbled, he snatched the gun from his hand. Seeing that the situation was not right, the other person rushed to grab Jin-won. Without hesitation, he shot him in the shoulder. His long arm reached out and pulled Jin-won, who was blocked by the two kidnappers, over. Jin-won no longer had any strength left. Earlier, she had been accumulating strength for a long time. She and Mo Jingshan had similar experiences. Once, they had driven a car into the sea on this road to escape danger. When she heard that this was the coastal road, she immediately understood Mo Jingshan's intentions for driving here. Either they would be successfully intercepted by the police cars, or they would drive into the sea. The safety barrier here could be broken, and they could successfully drive the car into the sea. As long as they entered the sea, the two of them would definitely reveal their flaws in their frantic attempts to escape. If they were not good at swimming, it would be even easier to shake them off. The moment the man wrapped his arm around her waist and brought her back into his embrace, Jin-won's hair was still stained with blood. Her vision flickered as she watched the two kidnappers struggle over to fight. At this moment, Mo Jingshan had already created enough opportunities. His movements and awareness did not falter in the slightest. As he placed Jin-won on the passenger seat, he raised the gun with his other hand and fired several shots at the two men's wrists and shoulders. As the two men fell back against the seat, covered in blood from the fear of his accurate marksmanship, Mo Jingshan picked up the other gun and fired 2 shots at the same time, hitting the two kidnappers' legs and knees. Jin-won sat weakly on the front passenger seat. She could only hear the gunshots. She opened her eyes slightly to see the cold killing intent in Mo Jingshan's eyes. She glanced to the side and saw that although the two kidnappers were not fatally wounded, their limbs had been crippled and they were convulsing in pain as they lay on the back of the car. Blood dyed half the car, and the blood flowed freely. The moment the car entered the sea, because the lock on the car door was broken, the seal was destroyed. Water quickly entered the car. Thankfully, the windows were open, and Mo Jingshan managed to open the car door in time. The two kidnappers were covered in blood as they sat there paralyzed. They could only watch as the car quickly filled with water and sank into the sea. The two of them widened their eyes in fright. Their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Mo Jingshan carried Jin Wan, who was sitting on the passenger seat and had no strength left, out of the car. Jin Wan knew how to swim, but at this moment, she did not have the ability to swim up on her own. Her entire body was held firmly in the man's embrace. The sea appeared calm, but traces of blood floated out of the car. The car sank quickly in the sea. This time, the two of them escaped from the sea very quickly. Mo Jingshan swiftly carried the weak Jin Wan out of the sea. Earlier, Jin Wan did not manage to hold her breath and choked on the water. She coughed violently and leaned weakly against his embrace. She wanted to speak but could not speak. She raised her eyes to see that the police cars had surrounded them. The two kidnappers would definitely be fished out. Whether they lived or died was no longer their concern. All of Mo Jingshan's methods of dealing with the kidnappers and the places he had shot were all within the scope of legal self-defense. Before they were carried out of the sea, Mo Jingshan removed his jacket and covered her body with it. Without a word, he brought her out of the sea and carried her ashore. The sirens of police cars lingered around, and several SWAT officers came over to ask if they were all right. At this time, Yengu also rushed over from another car. When he saw Jin Wan in Mo Jingshan's arms, covered in blood and seawater, he asked in disbelief, "Sister Wan? Why is it you guys?" Mo Jingshan ignored the other police officers. He only glanced at Yengu as he rushed over. At the same time, he caught a glimpse of the car that Yengu had been driving ever since they left the Mo home last night. It was Jin Wan's car that was parked among the countless police cars. Car keys. He raised his hand, expressionlessly speaking to Yengu. Yengu was startled. Logically speaking, in such a situation, he should have immediately brought them to the police car to give their statements. After all, they had just been kidnapped. However, when he saw that Jin Wan seemed to be injured, he subconsciously pulled out the car keys. After receiving the keys, Mo Jingshan directly carried Jin Wan over. He opened the car door and placed her in the front passenger seat. Under the astonished gaze of the police officers, he expressionlessly sat in the driver's seat. Jin Wan's entire body was covered in blood. It was as though she was in pain everywhere. She sat in the front passenger seat and did not speak. She only glanced at the calm sea not far away. Almost as soon as he closed the door, Mo Jingshan abruptly stepped on the accelerator. The small white car that she usually drove at a slow speed was like an arrow released from a bow. Carrying the man's exceptionally cold gaze and Jin Wan's pain and complicated emotions, it turned back to the seaside road and drove into the distance. Mo Jingshan expressionlessly gripped the steering wheel. He did not say a single word, nor did he look at her. He only stepped heavily on the accelerator, and the frantic sound of the accelerator was as though he was shouting himself hoarse. The scenery outside the window could barely be seen clearly. It flashed past her eyes. Jin Wan did not ask him to slow down. She was also almost speechless. It was as though the moment she opened her mouth, the stench of blood would rush out from her chest. The car drove all the way, and in less than 5 minutes, they arrived at the nearest hotel invested by Shine Group. The two of them didn't say a word all the way until Mo Jingshan stopped the car, got out of the car, and pulled Jin Wan out of the passenger seat with an ugly look. He dragged her down without the slightest bit of gentleness. Chapter 5:12. Mo Jingshan walked in and instructed the hotel staff to immediately call the doctor over. He then heavily dragged her into the elevator and pushed her against the glass wall. The moment the elevator doors closed, he pressed her down tightly. Between gritted teeth, he asked her, "Jean Wan, did I tell you not to move?" His voice was as cold as a blade. It was no longer as calm and composed as before. It was clear that he had already lost control. Jean Wan's back slammed against the glass wall of the elevator painfully. Her wrist was also instantly gripped in pain. She stood in her spot and did not speak. Yes, he had said it before. Tell her not to move. Afterward, he mouthed a warning to her not to move. It was not the first time he had said this, but she still moved. Because in that instant, the two kidnappers had already fired at him. They wanted to kill him. She did not want this man anymore, but that did not mean that she had never loved this man. She could not watch him die. She did not want to see his wounded back and neck suffer any more harm. That was why she had rushed up, seeking an opportunity to snatch the gun away. That's right, her skills were very poor. She was not strong, and she did not have the confidence. However, she had still been rash. Her rash actions had caused him more trouble. Originally, Mo Jingshan had planned to cooperate with the police to stop them at an intersection on Hai Road. In the end, because of her, he had driven the car into the ocean. She had been injured and angered the kidnappers. She had almost died in their hands. Mo Jingshan's anger had already burned away his rationality. Her silence could not extinguish his anger and instead added fuel to it. He pressed down hard on her shoulders. When the elevator stopped, he pulled her to the door, opened it, and pushed her in. Jean Wan's steps were unsteady as he pushed her into the bathroom. The shower head was aimed at her head. He turned on the switch, and cold water suddenly sprayed out, splashing all over her body. Jean Wan did not resist. She waited until the water in the shower gradually heated up and reached a suitable temperature, warming up her body that had been chilled by the seawater. As her body gradually regained its warmth, the scent of the two kidnappers on her body was also washed away. The blood on her head and body was also washed away. However, her heart suddenly felt a wave of boiling heat. The man stood under the water with her, his soaked shirt wrapped around him. He grabbed her chin cruelly and forced her to look at him. "I've been planning for 3 years just to change the course of your life. I wanted you to live well, not to send you to your death." The man in front of her panted heavily, and every word he said pounded on her heart. Jean Wan instantly stared at him in a daze. It was as though something that had been puzzling her for a long time was finally reconnected. She stared at the man in front of her in a daze. The water in the shower kept pouring down. She stared at the man with her wet eyes and felt that all the blood in her body had frozen. Su Jilan died in exactly the same way as she did in her previous life. After Ji Mengran went missing, she was homeless and even sold by human traffickers. She almost lost her life. In her previous life, everything that had happened to her was related to the two of them, but all the paths she had taken and all the obstacles in her life seemed to have been forcibly transferred to them, the starting point of her life, divorce, and return to the position she belonged to. A new life, a new life? Was that what he meant? Was that it? The man held her chin. "I should have stopped you from coming back. I should have used the most vicious and unpleasant words in the world to attack you. Even if I hurt your heart to pieces, as long as you give up, as long as you obediently live a happy life with a new person, as long as you don't appear in front of me again." Mo Jingshan's eyes were almost dyed red from the fear and anger that he had almost personally watched her send herself to her death. Jean Wan had seen him lose control before. But she had never seen him lose control like this. Hadn't he always been very calm? Damn that calmness. He stared at her and asked, "I'm willing to bear all the separation, even if you hate me for the rest of your life, as long as you learn how to live a better life. As long as it's for your own good, I'm willing to do anything. But why did you come back?" The sprinkler gradually turned on, and more water poured down. For a moment, Jean Wan couldn't see his face clearly through the curtain of water. She could only stand under the water as if she had been petrified, letting the warm water wash away all the coldness from head to toe. Mo Jingshan was full of anger, but he had nowhere to vent it. Seeing her standing motionless under the water with a blank look on her face, his reason was finally completely annihilated. He picked her up and pressed her against the cold wall behind the curtain of water. "You'll never learn to be obedient, will you? You don't know how to cherish your life, do you? What on earth do you want from me? Jin Wan, what else do you want from me?" He gritted his teeth. His breath was very heavy, brushing against her face. His eyes were bloodshot, and his whole body was trembling. He had never been so embarrassed before. Even when he was in Cambodia, even when he was covered in blood and almost killed in that car accident, he had never been so embarrassed. He peeled away all the forbearance and suffering word by word, as if he was peeling away the cruel shell layer by layer. But she was right. The past was the past. Things were different now. She didn't even want to know the reason why he forced her to divorce and cruelly and heartlessly pushed her away. So what if he knew? He was prepared to be alone for the rest of his life. He just wanted to watch her live well from a distance. He wanted to see her learn to grow up, become strong, and gradually become indestructible. He wanted to see her not die one day at the age of 30, nor would she suddenly disappear one day because of the change in her life. He just wanted her to live a safe and stable life. But she insisted on appearing in front of him again and again, making him unable to bear it and making him lose control several times. He wanted to approach her but didn't know how to pull back the woman he had hurt with his own hands. He wanted to recover this lost land of hers, but he knew that she had been hurt so badly that she had almost forgotten her feelings. For the first time in Mo Jingshan's life, he didn't know what to do with her. He was helpless. The sound of water from the shower continued to ring in his ears. Jin Wan stared at him with her black and white eyes. She opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. She suddenly smiled, and the smile on her lips grew wider. She seemed calm, but her eyes were fixed on him. She did not shout herself hoarse, nor did she show any anger, fear, or doubt. She only stared at him with a pair of red eyes, and her face was covered with droplets of water. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. Mo Jingshan felt as if he had been hit in the head with a stick. At this moment, a string in his brain seemed to have completely broken. It was as if all reason had been burned away. The man's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly lowered his head and kissed her hard. Chapter 5:13. This kiss was too wanton and entangled. Mo Jingshan seemed to have been tied down by reason and responsibility for many years. After she returned to High City, thousands of strings were cut off by her one by one. Now, it was finally the last string. The man had nowhere to vent his anger. The fear of almost watching her die sublimated in the entangled kiss. He had never tasted this kind of feeling in his life. It was so difficult to take back everything that he had pushed away with his own hands after all the dust had settled. He didn't even know where to start. At this moment, his emotions were completely out of control. He cast aside everything in the past and no longer had any worries. Love was love. He had to take back what he had lost. The unreserved passionate kiss hit her lips and all her senses. Jin Wan was firmly imprisoned against the wall by him. The sound of water was in her ears. She didn't know whether her face was tears or water. She could barely breathe, and all the pain in her body was numb. All her senses had stopped, and she could only feel the man holding her tightly against the wall. In the past 3 years, Mo Jingshan had lived like an ascetic monk. He had planned for her to live a life that had been ruined by others. Finally, with his help, he had succeeded. He had completely let go and allowed her to grow on her own. He did not visit her, nor did he care about her. He had restrained himself and disciplined himself. In the end, this woman's return had broken his vows. He was like a child who was experiencing feelings for the first time. He carefully approached her and was pushed away. He approached her again and was pushed away again. His rationality was still there, telling him that this woman would never be able to return to his arms again, telling him that he should let go, but his body was still not under his control. He controlled himself not to approach but saw her shining in the seaside resort. He saw her frown and smile at others but coldly keep her distance from him, the person who used to be closest to her. He didn't want to agree to the government's stadium reconstruction project. However, when he saw MN Group's name, he signed the agreement on the document that he should have refused. He was talking to a business partner in a cafe when he saw another man's mother holding her hand and smiling at her as though she was looking at her daughter-in-law. He saw her wearing a jade bracelet on her white wrist. After dinner that night, he somehow drove to her place. Before the power went out, he went upstairs only to see that she hadn't returned home yet. When he looked down, he saw that the man had stolen a kiss on her face with the help of the light from the phone in the car. When he saw her stunned expression as she sat stiffly in the passenger seat, it was very vivid. All his self-control was almost ignited in an instant. He lost control more than once. Every time he lost control hidden under the calm surface, he gradually lost control. The woman he treasured the most became the woman he couldn't touch. This was the lips he had longed for a long time but could only taste several times under the pretext of being drunk. Her soft lips were like his heart when he loved her. It was impossible to make up for the 3 years she had missed in one kiss. Jean Wan's shoulder-length hair was scattered over her shoulders, and a few strands were wrapped around her neck like seaweed. Her breathing was erratic, and she struggled to breathe in his arms. The man's kiss was almost ferocious. In the bathroom, he pressed her against the wall and tore off the last piece of clothing on her body. When the water was steaming, the endless desire seemed to be ready to explode. Everything could no longer be hidden, and everything did not want to stop. Just when Mo Jingshan couldn't bear it any longer and was about to have sex with her, the woman in his arms suddenly softened. He paused, and when he saw her close her eyes and almost fall down, he took a step back and stretched out his arm, and she fell forward weakly in his arms. She was injured. Under the cover of the water and long hair, the bleeding wound on her head could barely be seen. However, her body couldn't bear it and she fainted. Mo Jingshan's expression was cold as he carried her up and walked out of the bathroom. Jean Wan's body was soaked in water and blood. The hotel staff had already called the doctor under his orders, and the doctor was knocking on the door cautiously. The doctor's treatment of the wound was very painful. The butt of the handgun was not that sharp. Her head had only been smashed, and it was like a knock. There was still some blood. Furthermore, when Jean Wan was brought out of the sea, she didn't have much strength and couldn't even hold her breath in the water. As a result, she choked on the seawater and felt uncomfortable in her throat and lungs. Jean Wan quietly lay on the bed, allowing the doctor to treat the wound on her head. When she turned over, someone placed an ice pack on the swollen side of her face, causing her to furrow her brows in pain. She frowned in her sleep. "Brother Mo, I'm sorry." Even when everything was over, Jean Wan's dreams were still of the salty and cold seawater. She saw Mo Jingshan pushing her out of the deep sea with a cold expression again and again. She saw the moment she was finally pushed out of the sea. Mo Jingshan smiled and sank back into the sea. "No, don't." Jean Wan struggled in her dreams and charged back into the sea. She swam wildly in the endless sea but couldn't reach him no matter how hard she tried. She swam toward him with all her might, only to see a pitch-black hole in the depths of the sea. Mo Jingshan stared at her as though she was a stranger, and then he was instantly sucked into the black hole. She quickly swam over. The moment she entered the black hole, the world seemed to have been restored to its brightness. She saw herself dying in the prison. The moment she fell unconscious, a figure suddenly rushed in. She finally saw him clearly. That person was Mo Jingshan. It was actually Mo Jingshan, who had suddenly returned from America after not seeing him for 10 years. He carried her body that still had a trace of warmth. Ignoring the group of prison guards who were obedient to him, he carried her out expressionlessly. Jean Wan watched this scene in a daze. She wanted to follow him out but was blocked by an invisible barrier. She could only see the man's figure gradually moving further and further away. The light changed in an instant, and it suddenly turned into a quiet ward. In the ward, she lay silently on the white bed. Mo Jingxian stood by the bedside, silently watching her body that had already cooled to the point of not having any warmth at all. Jin Wan couldn't walk over and could only watch the man standing by the bed from afar. His gaze was so gentle that it reminded her of the 10 months of Mo Jingxian. He looked at the 10 years that belonged to her, and his gaze was clear and cold. Chapter 5:14. Car accident? How many months did he wake up? Jin Wan stared in disbelief at the silent, cold man standing by the bed until she saw the man's fingers gently stroke her eyebrows and eyes as if he were really the 10-month-old Mo Jingxian standing by the bed. She could no longer hear what Ji Mengran said. Jin Wan looked at Mo Jingxian's face, which gradually became blurry. She couldn't see anything clearly, but the car accident Ji Mengran said happened 10 years later in Los Angeles and he slept for several months. It happened so much earlier in this life. Mo Jingxian, who had promised to leave her world, suddenly returned to High City from America and rushed to the prison as soon as he came back. It was as though he wanted to stop her death. It was as though he already knew everything, but in the end, he could not stop her from taking her last breath. He kept his promise. He didn't come back for 10 years, but he didn't marry for 10 years. After waking up from the car accident, he suddenly rushed back to High City. Could it be that the car accident gave him the memory of what she experienced 10 years ago after she was reborn? So when Mo Jingxian woke up from the same experience, he also remembered everything? It was just that it happened many years earlier. So, he really knew everything. Her experience, her death, the long 10 years that they didn't meet because of her stubbornness and his promise, he knew everything. There was only white light in front of her. She couldn't see Mo Jingxian, couldn't see her cold body on the bed, and could only walk forward aimlessly. It was as though Mo Jingxian's voice was speaking by her ear. He lay down by her side, holding her ice-cold hand with his. Gently, she could not tell what he was saying by her ear. She wanted to come closer but couldn't. She wanted to speak, but she felt an invisible whirlpool sucking her away. Then there were countless strange dreams, so bizarre that she couldn't connect them. Sometimes she was in the past life, sometimes she was in the present. The scene of her dying in prison was suddenly overlapped with the scene of Su Jilan falling in prison. The scene of her homeless standing on the street with a blank face was overlapped with Ji Mengran's figure, until they were completely covered. It seemed that all the ruined traces of her life that had been caused by people had been replaced by these initiators. Jin Wan slept for a day and a night in confusion. When it was time to eat and apply medicine, the man would dig her out from under the blanket, feed her and apply medicine. She was half awake and could not distinguish reality from her dream. She only felt that the man was disturbing her dream when he woke her up to feed her. In the beginning, she would frown and throw a tantrum, refusing to eat. She wanted to continue sleeping, but it was useless after a few times. When she refused to eat, the man was even more stubborn than her. If she only cared about sleeping and refused to eat, she would be the one suffering if she did not cooperate. Therefore, when Jin Wan was dug up in a half-awake state, she had no choice but to eat obediently and let the man apply medicine or ice packs to her face. The next day, Jin Wan finally woke up, but when she opened her eyes and looked at the familiar and strange environment, she was stunned for a long time, wondering if she was still dreaming. This place, Aolan International? Coincidentally, when she woke up, a doctor came to check on her body. Jin Wan weakly closed her eyes and allowed the doctor to examine her. When the doctor left, she lay on the bed, staring blankly at the man who had just sent the doctor away and returned to the bedroom. The moment she met Mo Jingxian's gaze, Jin Wan finally woke up from her dream. Everything that had happened before she fainted rushed back to her mind. She originally did not speak, but Mo Jingxian spoke up. "You're awake? You slept for almost 2 days. You didn't even eat properly when you were half awake. Come and eat first. Jean Wan did not have time to ask, wasn't she brought to a hotel near Bin Hai Road by him? Why was she at Aolan International when she woke up? The man directly walked out of the bedroom, leaving her with a view of his back in a white shirt. Jean Wan, she did not move from the bed. After waiting for a while, the man returned. However, Mo Jingshan actually said that she was not allowed to eat in the bedroom. He said that aside from the injury on her head, her other injuries were not serious. After sleeping for 2 days, her strength was severely lacking and she had to wake up to eat. Furthermore, she had to go to the restaurant to eat. Jean Wan remained unmoving. My head hurts. I don't have any strength. The man glanced at her, walked over, and directly lifted the quilt. I'll carry you over. Jean Wan's face was indeed slightly pale. The moment the quilt was lifted, she abruptly lowered her head to look at the man's shirt she was wearing. She had been washed clean, and her body still smelled faintly of shower gel. Her hair was also fresh and clean. Aside from the shirt that belonged to him, she did not even have any underwear. So, while she was unconscious, he not only brought her back to Aolan International, but also bathed and changed her clothes for her. Jean Wan did not move. I'm not feeling well. I haven't woken up yet. I want to lie down for a while more, Anne. She was not wearing any other clothes. Regardless of whether those dreams were real or not, the two of them were already divorced. It was really inappropriate for her to wear so little in front of him. The woman lying on the bed stared at him with her clear black and white eyes. She insisted on lying on the bed and did not move. She even had the intention of pulling the quilt back over her body. The moment she pulled the quilt back over her body, the man silently lifted the quilt and threw it aside. He scooped the person on the bed into his arms and carried her out. Sleep after eating. I've only fed you some porridge these days. You have to eat. The moment Jean Wan was carried, her body stiffened, but she really did not have any strength to resist. She could only widen her eyes and say, Mo Jingshan, don't you have any clothes here that I can wear myself? The man said indifferently, before you returned the key to Aolan International to me 3 years ago, didn't you take away all of your things in advance? Jean Wan. So this is really Aolan International? Why did you bring me here? The man was unperturbed. The hotel is not suitable for recuperation. Jean Wan rolled her eyes at him. The hotel was not suitable for recuperation? Then why didn't he say that it was not suitable for her to be violated when she was injured? If she hadn't fainted in time, he would have turned into a beast in the bathroom. But fortunately, her injury was not serious. She was hit by the butt of the gun. She should be thankful that she did not lose her memory or become a fool. Jean Wan couldn't help but touch her hair, wondering if the doctor would shave off a piece of her hair to make it easier for her to apply medicine. She was worried, but when she touched her hair, she was relieved to find that not a single strand of hair was missing. Chapter 5:15. When she was carried to the dining table, Jean Wan looked at the food on the table, which was obviously just ordered from a restaurant. Jean Wan, am I not a patient? How can I eat such oily food? The man put her on the dining chair. They're all vegetarian dishes. They're not so oily. Jean Wan didn't speak anymore but reached out and tugged the hem of her shirt down hard, trying to cover as much of her thighs as possible. When the man caught a glimpse of her movement, she still kept a straight face, but after all, she still had a lot of questions in her heart. She picked up the chopsticks and asked, by the way, did Su Jilan's death really have something to do with you? Eat. Jean Wan, she glanced at him again. She was indeed hungry. No matter what, she had to eat. She was not in a hurry to talk about anything. She lifted her chopsticks and began to eat, but she only ate a little of the dishes. Although these dishes looked good and tasted delicious, perhaps because she had just woken up, she could not eat much. As she ate, she lost interest in these dishes. In addition to these vegetarian dishes, there was also a very light steamed fish. After tasting the fish, she felt that although it tasted good, it was not good enough. She couldn't help saying, nowadays, the chefs of the hotels near Aolan International are not very good. For some reason, she felt that the food sitting here shouldn't taste so bad, but she couldn't figure out why she felt this way. Mo Jingshan scooped soup for her. Hearing her words, he looked up at her and said indifferently, I was busy taking care of you when you were in a coma. Do you expect me to make time to cook for you? Jean Wan bit the chopsticks and fell silent. Oh, right. Every time she lived in Aolan International, Mo Jingshan would cook for her even if he came back late from working overtime. Every time she came here, she could almost always eat the delicious food he made. In the Yu Garden, she had Auntie Chen to cook for her. In other places, she might order takeout or cook for herself, but in Aolan International, she often ate his cooking. It turned out that the strange feeling she had just now was just because of this place. The man put the soup in front of her and didn't talk to her anymore. Eat. Jean Wan looked at the cold and indifferent man opposite her. She recalled those strange and dazzling dreams and slowly pursed her lips. Let's not talk about those dreams for the time being. What he said about returning to the starting point and about life's trajectory could also be put aside for the time being. But for the past 2 days, he hadn't gone to the company and had been taking care of her. She heard that after he took over Shine Group, he almost never took a day off. This man now looked more unreasonable than before, but he was especially patient with her. She lowered her head to eat. Perhaps to show that she was not really unable to eat because of the gap, she simply ate a big bowl in one go. Although she felt much better, she was still badly bullied by the 2 kidnappers and slept for 2 days. It was impossible for her body to recover in a short time. She sat at the dining table without moving, but in her heart, she had already decided to go back to bed and have a good sleep, waiting for her physical and mental state to recover. But it did not seem appropriate for her to continue living in Orange International. After all, they had been divorced for so long. Jean Wan didn't think she was a vengeful person before, but when it came to Mo Jingshan, she found that although she was not obsessed with the past, nor would she tear her heart out and make a scene, she was still very vengeful. My cell phone and everything in my bag should have fallen into the sea with your car. Now I can't contact anyone. You should have a cell phone here. Can you lend it to me to make a call? She asked. The man stared at her for 10 seconds. When Jean Wan was about to explain why she wanted to borrow his cell phone, he said lightly, Stay here until your wound is completely healed. I'll send someone to inform your company. Jean Wan, she hadn't even said the reason. Mo Jingshan walked up to her and lowered his eyes to look at her still pale face. Go back to the bedroom to rest. There are no clothes for you here. I'll ask someone to buy them from the mall and buy some daily necessities you can use, okay? Jean Wan sat at the dining table, pursed her lips, and said after a moment, You can't have no underwear left here. Let's not talk about buying clothes. Is it appropriate for me to stay here wearing your shirt without any underwear? Mo Jingshan, why not? Mo Jingshan, why not? Seeing Jean Wan's angry expression, he seemed to be helpless and said in a low voice, Then I'll go look for it for you. See if you forgot to take 1 or 2 with you when you left. Jean Wan, ask Mo Jingshan to help her find her underwear. Not to mention that the 2 of them no longer had a legal relationship, even before the divorce. He didn't seem to have done this kind of thing. Seeing that she didn't answer, the man turned to the bedroom. Seeing that he was really going to look for it, Jean Wan got up. I'll find it myself. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, raised his chin, and pointed to the bedroom, saying indifferently, Go ahead. Why did the topic inexplicably change from borrowing his cell phone to looking for underwear? Jean Wan looked at his handsome features and brows. Her expression was heavy, but she still unwillingly and quickly walked toward the sun. As she walked, she continued to pull down the hem of the shirt, wondering if Mo Jingshan did it on purpose. He clearly had a shirt with a longer hem than this one. She had worn it in the past. He was tall and had long legs. When she wasn't wearing high heels, he was more than a head taller than she was, so his shirts usually covered more than half of her thighs. However, this shirt was clearly not the longest. It barely covered the top of her thighs. She couldn't pull it down even an inch. She pulled the shirt and walked into the bedroom with a dark face. She opened the wardrobe, pulled open the drawer, and rummaged through it. Sure enough, none of her things were left, not even in the corner. 3 years ago, before she returned the key to him, she did come to take everything away. But at that time, she did it very quickly. She couldn't have left nothing behind. But now, it seemed that she was really serious at that time. Indeed, she didn't leave anything behind. The man didn't stop her from rummaging through the drawer. He stood in front of the bedroom door with one hand in his trouser pocket and looked at her indifferently. "I've asked someone to buy it for you. None of your clothes will be missing. 2 hours won't matter. Just put up with it for a while, okay?" Seeing that there was really nothing, Jean-Wan pushed the drawer back heavily and reluctantly agreed with an ugly look on her face. But she couldn't keep her legs bare, so she opened the wardrobe and took out a pair of loose, soft trousers from it. Of course, it was Mo Jingshan's. She hid behind the wardrobe door and put on the trousers. When she came out from behind the wardrobe door smugly, she suddenly met Mo Jingshan's eyes and paused. Chapter 5:16. Sure enough, Mo Jingshan's eyes stopped on the trousers she was wearing and then looked her up and down. A moment later, he smiled faintly. Jean-Wan closed the wardrobe door speechlessly, feeling that it was not wise to stay in the same room with him. Now she was dressed like this, without a bag, cell phone, or any ID. For some reason, she felt as if she had lost her freedom and became shorter. Even if she wanted to talk to him, she seemed to have lost her courage. She put her hand on the wardrobe door and suddenly asked, "Who did you send to buy clothes for me?" "Shenmu. Won't it be too inconvenient for him to buy things like underwear?" The man answered casually, "Auntie Chen." Jean-Wan calmly made an "oh" sound, turned to sit down on the bed for a rest, and did not continue to ask. She had just taken 2 steps when she suddenly stopped and turned to look at him. "Auntie Chen?" The man's eyes fell on the trousers she was wearing, looked at the trousers that were too long and stepped on by her feet, and said indifferently, "Auntie Chen's youngest son was admitted to High City University. She came from the countryside to accompany him. She lives near the university and has nothing to do, so I asked her to find time to clean every day." After leaving the Yu Garden, Jean-Wan thought she would never see Auntie Chen again. But she did not expect that Auntie Chen's current job was still with Mo Jingshan and the Mo family. This was good. First, Auntie Chen's life and salary were guaranteed, and second, Auntie Chen was trustworthy and suitable for long-term employment. She was relieved that Auntie Chen was going to buy clothes for her. She didn't say anything, sat down on the bed, raised her legs, and rolled up the long trousers, saying, "I may have to borrow your cell phone. I have so many certificates in my bag that I need to apply for. Many of them are related to the company. I can't be careless. This kind of thing can't be delayed." With that, she raised her eyes and said, "And your car, you didn't change it 3 years ago. Now it finally has to be scrapped, right?" And hearing the man's calm voice, Jean-Wan looked at him, only to see that he did not intend to continue talking about the car and had already handed her a cell phone. Jean-Wan glanced at it and stood up to receive the phone. She poked at the numbers of several company employees and Xiao Ba that she could barely remember, saying, "I still have to apply for a new SIM card. Auntie Chen has already gone. When she returns with the clothes, she will bring the replacement card over." In an instant, even the last reason to leave here was gone. Jean-Wan held the phone in silence for a moment, lowered her head, and continued to dial the number without speaking. When she was on the phone, Mo Jingshan turned and walked out. She sat on the bed and called Xiao Ba, explaining why she had been missing for the past 2 days, and asked them to get the documents and certificates in her bag that had been destroyed by the seawater. After that, she put down the phone and looked at the black cell phone in her hand. Suddenly, he felt that all the things that he had been worried about since he woke up had been explained. His heart also calmed down. She could almost hear the words the man had said to her as he pinched her chin in hatred when he pushed her against the wall of the hotel bathroom. "I've been planning for 3 years just to change the course of your life, to let you live well, not to let you die so easily." She lowered her eyes, put down the phone, and then sat on the bed for a while. Finally, she got up and went out. She rolled up the trousers that had grown a lot. Now she didn't have to step on the trouser legs anymore, and it was much easier for her to walk. She walked out of the bedroom in a man's shirt and trousers. She didn't find slippers in the bedroom. When she got out of bed, Enchanting carried her to dinner, so she came out barefoot. After walking out, she was about to ask him when the man's low, indifferent voice rang above her head. "Put on your shoes." Jean paused and was about to say that she had taken away all her shoes here 3 years ago. How could there be any shoes for her to wear? The man just pointed to the door with his chin. She followed his finger and saw that he had taken out a pair of new gray men's slippers. They were his, new and unused. She looked at them attentively, walked over to put them on, and came back in the pair of slippers that were much larger than her feet. In recent years, she had been very particular about her appearance because of her work. At this moment, she was wearing a loose shirt, loose trousers, and a pair of men's slippers. She looked unbelievably casual, and because her hair was only shoulder length, she was clean and had no style at all. She looked like a high school student who stole adults' clothes to wear. She looked neither fish nor fowl, but she had a different kind of charm. Seeing her like this, the man smiled faintly. When people were in a familiar environment, they would subconsciously immerse themselves in the memories of this environment and even feel that nothing had changed, but at this moment, seeing Enchanting smile, Jean couldn't calm down even if she wanted to. She turned her head stiffly, but her expression was serious. Enchanting. He sat on the sofa opposite her, picked up the glass kettle on the coffee table, and poured her a glass of warm water. "What do you want to say? You'll answer whatever I ask? You won't lie to me?" The man put the glass on the side of the coffee table closest to her, glanced at her, and said nothing. She approached him again and stared into his eyes. "There are still many things I don't understand. Do I have a second chance at life, but I can't change the course of my life at will? If I don't do something, I'll still die when I'm 30 years old in a few years?" He didn't seem to care much about the process she had never understood. He just said casually, "Now as long as you live a good life, don't risk your life for others, eat regularly, and keep exercising, I promise you'll live a long life." So, Sujilan's death and what happened in the 2 years after Ji Mengran's disappearance have something to do with you? The man just glanced at her and waited for her next words. "How did you do it? What do you know? Then are you dead? Did you die once just like me? Or did you just wake up with those memories? What else did you know when I didn't know?" You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.